Hello, do you like New Japan Pro Wrestling? Are you a Shin Nihon freak? If so, check out the Super J-Cast with Joel and Damon on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network.
And even if you fucking hate New Japan Pro Wrestling, listen to the Super J-Cast anyway. Not just for our great show reviews, analysis, and pastrami sandwiches, but there's also usually some dick jokes somewhere in the obligatory opening 30 minutes of absolute nonsense we chat about every single week. That's the Super J-Cast for all the best talk about New Japan Pro Wrestling, crisps, and pornography.
This podcast is a member of the Voices of Wrestling Podcasting Network. Visit voicesofwrestling.com to hear the rest of our great podcasts, as well as show reviews, columns, opinions, and updates across the world of wrestling.
Competition starting to get thick, it's the click, so I hope you watch your A-game. A-man, no rain on the track when we unite and spit. This isn't A-game, better bring your A-game. Competition starting to get thick, it's the click, so I hope you watch your A-game. A-man, no rain on the track.
Hey, now it's the Mike and JD Show, and I'm your host, Mike Gilbert. And this is a very special edition of the Mike and JD Show. Happy 4th of July. As you can tell, we didn't do a live show this week, so we were not able to accommodate everybody live on Thursday night because of the 4th of July holiday. I myself, I'm taking my family over to watch the fireworks at the Navy base on Fort Island. They do a big fireworks show every year, and of course JD is doing his family thing as well, so we're not able to accommodate, but we wanted to go ahead and give you guys some content right here on the Voices of Wrestling Network. And so what we're going to do is I'm putting together a compilation of a bunch of content from the Patreon, starting with my Forbidden Door reaction show. I recorded this on the Monday night after Forbidden Door. And so the show was still fresh in my mind. I also opened the show up with some news, so you guys will get to hear some of that. But I went live on Patreon on Monday night after Forbidden Door, and I did a full review of that. And then after that, I'm going to put the entire Who Killed WCW series that JD and I did for our overtime show. We recorded that each and every week after Who Killed WCW had aired, and we have our own fresh, unique perspectives. And by the end of it, not only did we give our thoughts on the overall series as a whole, but we determined whom we thought killed WCW. Please enjoy the show, and if you like the content, you could have had this early on and ad-free on our Patreon. Go to patreon.com/the Mike and JD Show. And please give it a shot. And next week we will be live like we usually are on a Thursday night on the Voices of Wrestling YouTube, as well as the Mike and JD Show YouTube. And then of course we'll have some fresh content right here on the Voices of Wrestling Network podcast feed. But enjoy the show. I want to start off with with some of the news stories that are out right now. We had Forbidden Door last night, and there was a top free agent on the market was actually in the building last night. Donovan Dijak, whom we talked about last week on the Mike and JD Show. And I think just about every podcast has been out there that has talked about what his free agent future looks like have all been kind of pointing towards TNA. Well, he was at Forbidden Door last night, and he made it known that he was there, and he tweeted about it. And now he's probably just there to get to know the crew a little bit, and to get to know Tony maybe. I mean, he's friends with all those guys. He was on the Indies with a lot of those guys, and in Ring of Honor with a lot of those guys. So he signed with WWE just shortly before AEW was created. And this is his first opportunity to be a free agent since then. So it makes sense that that's where he would want to go. And I don't blame him for getting his name out there and for letting people know that he is backstage. Whether or not he actually signs with AEW remains to be seen. I think AEW should want a guy like that. Like he's 6'7", like 275 pounds. He's jacked. He's good looking. He can work. Promos probably not there. There's something missing from him as far as personality goes. This is why he just never got over in WWE. But he can have the matches that AEW wrestlers like to have. The problem is there's a lot of guys there. They do that. And in fact, like, what's the difference between him and Kyle Fletcher? Main difference is Kyle Fletcher is just way younger and can do all the same stuff and is big and strong and, you know, good looking, the whole deal, like, and is on the verge of making himself into a superstar. So you already have a similar attraction in your company, and who is in his early 20s and it won't cost as much, right? He will on his next contract, but he's like on a rookie deal, I'm sure, right now. He's probably not making a ton of money. Good money, you know, but not like a ton. But it would not shock me to see AEW sign him. They sign a lot of people. Probably too many people. There's a lot of people that aren't doing a whole lot there that have been signed for a long time that are just chilling. So, but he was there, and we'll see. We'll keep an eye on that. We'll see if he actually ends up signing with AEW or not. Also, it was today, today. Ricochet is a free agent as of July 1st today, and all signs are pointing towards him signing with AEW. Now, he is a guy that is so special and so unique, and a guy whom everybody for a long time has been saying WWE has been missing the boat on. Some people say that about Donovan Dijak. Most people say that about Ricochet, and I think it's mostly true with Ricochet. He just wasn't their type. Dijak was WWE's type, and it just didn't work. But Ricochet wasn't their type, and he still got over a little bit, but they just never took him serious on the main roster. And now he is a free and clear of his WWE contract. He is a free agent. It would not shock me to see him sign any day now. But I also thought that about the Motor City Machine Guns when they came available. I thought they would have been on AEW eminently. And nobody's really reported. I think Bodyslam reported that the Machine Guns were signed, but nobody, they get stuff wrong sometimes. They're good a lot of times, but they do also get some. I think they jumped the gun on some stories, and that's bitten them in the past. So, but Sapp has never gone so far as to say, Sapp or Meltzer or anybody like that, like the top guys, have never gone so far as to say that the Machine Guns have signed. But yeah, Ricochet, a complete free agent. He is no longer under contract to WWE. And everybody within WWE and a lot of people within AEW expect him to sign there. And I would expect that too. And I think once he does, he will be a star day one. They have a lot of matchups they can give for him. He's perfect for what they do there. I can see him, in that TNT title mix and doing all that stuff. And that would be really cool, man. It's going to be cool to see Ricochet get to do Ricochet shit on a big stage, because he has not been able to be like his complete and total self since he had signed with WWE. They held him back a little bit, and I think that he's going to get unleashed here in AEW, and I think that he's going to make a dent. Will he turn business around? No, that's just not what he does. But he's going to be awesome. It's going to be fun to watch. He's awesome. He's great. He's a great wrestler, so I'm looking forward to it. Also, now Natty Neidhart, it's come out that talks of, I don't know if they've stalled or what, but she has been moved to the alumni section. WWE and Natty are still working on a deal, but at this point, nobody knows if she's going to resign or not. So she could become a free agent here pretty soon. And we'll pay attention to that. Natty is one of those that, I think AEW would probably take her. But AEW, again, pretty loaded, and they just got Britt Baker back. And I think they've already signed Camille, and she's just never been on TV. She's been signed for months and just never came on TV. So who knows what's if you sign, Natty's a big name though. Don't get me wrong. I think that if she did sign, she would be there, but I think it would just be a lateral move. And I don't know that she would even have better matches than what she was having in WWE. Would she get more freedom? Hell, I don't know. I don't know the difference between the freedom of being on a WWE deal in the women's division and being in AEW. I don't know what kind of freedom you're looking for, but I think it'd be cool to see her go and do a run in TNA with Jordynne Grace. I think TNA would need her and they would value her, and she would be be put in a position to be able to draw money. I mean, nobody draws money in TNA, but she could be in a position to be able to make a difference in their business. And if she went over to AEW, she just wouldn't make a difference. But it'd be fun to watch. But I think, me personally, I would have more fun seeing her, do a 3 match series with Jordynne Grace and then work some indie shots, and then probably head back to the WWE and ultimately ride off into the sunset. So, but that's some of the news that's out there. There's some other stuff that maybe we'll get into this weekend, hopefully if it breaks. But all kinds of stuff's happening in the world of AEW and WWE. Oh, WWE. Sorry, one last thing before I get off of the news topic. The Creed brothers are going to be working Bloodsport coming up. It was just announced by Josh Barnett. Shayna Baszler's already going to be working the show, but here, let me actually get the date. I got the text message from my buddy Matt. It is going to be July 28th in Brooklyn, New York. Brutus and Julius Creed, both of them, are going to be working Bloodsport. And that's the same card that Shayna Baszler is going to be on. So that's pretty cool. You know, WWE's kind of opened themselves up. They're allowing their talent to work other places and do some cool stuff. So for as evil as that company is, you know, they, at least in that respect, they've kind of turned the corner a little bit, and that's fun to see. You know, they actually had their stars on TNA over the weekend, the No Quarter Catch crew, Charlie Dempsey and a couple of other guys. I can't remember their names, but they were on TNA, and it looks like those guys are going to be on Slammiversary coming up, probably against the Rascals. So, and maybe Wesley would be joining up with the Rascals, but that's what what it looks like they're going to be doing. So, WWE is kind of, you know, putting themselves out there and trying to, get some olive branches out there to some other promotions and try to, you know, kind of change the identity of their franchise and the aura around them always being like this evil empire. I don't know that they're ever going to shake that. They have a long way to go. But lending out their talent to small promotions might help with some of that. Probably not, but it might help with a little bit of that. But man, oh man, I really do want to get into this Forbidden Door show. What a freaking show that it was too. I gotta say, I really enjoyed it. So off the top, was it a bit too long? Yes. Why am I complaining about that? Because I have a family and I can't devote 6 straight hours. And that's what it was, 6 straight hours to watching it. So I gotta be honest. I don't do pre-shows unless like the main show, like WWE's main shows are like 2.5 hours long now, like 5 matches. But their pre-shows are just like panel talking and stuff. So I just never watch them. Impact, their shows are 3 hours long and they usually have a couple matches on the pre-show. But I typically don't watch them unless the match actually means something, like it's advancing a storyline or it's going to be connected to something else. So with this, I was like, okay, 90-minute pre-show and a 4-hour pay-per-view. I don't have that kind of time. I just don't. But I wanted to watch some of it so that way I could actually at least talk about it intelligently on the podcast, or as intelligently as I could possibly be, which is not very much. So what was it? Was it a bit too long? Yes. Could they have taken a bunch of stuff out? Yes. Is that something to complain about? It depends on your situation. Everybody's like, oh, don't stop complaining about AEW shows being too long. If you're going to the show and you're expecting to be there for 7 hours, that makes sense. But if you're at home and you got a family, you got to pay attention to them. That gets to be tough. But when you're doing a podcast, and I'm only complaining as a podcaster, when you're doing a podcast, it takes a lot out of your day. It takes a lot out of your day to be able to speak on it intelligently. And so and it's typically the podcasters that are complaining because we feel an obligation to watch the whole thing. So that way we can talk about it on the podcast. But if you're just like an average fan, there's no reason to complain because you just don't have to watch it. And that's typically what I do, is I'm just not going to watch the pre-show. But anyway, on the pre-show, Kyle Fletcher defeated Serpentico in 3 minutes squash. And then we go to Malachi Black and Brody King defeated Kyle O'Reilly, Ishii. Malachi Black and Brody King faced Kyle O'Reilly and Ishii and Private Party and Roderick Strong and Gabe Kidd. Anyway, Malachi and Brody got the victory. It was actually Brody hit a Gonzo bomb. This is after he got dropped on his head by Ishii. That looked pretty sick. That was pretty wild. Chris Statlander and Momo Watanabe versus Tom Nakano and Willow Nightingale. Nakano gave Watanabe the hammerlock German suplex for the pin. That one I did not watch. I'm sure it was great, but I did not watch it. Saraya versus Mariah May, Owen Hart tournament qualifier. So this is a match that is important. So I watched it. I don't know. Saraya, and it's been like this for a long time. It's been toast. They got 9 minutes. Probably went too long. They probably could have done this one in 5 and just had Mariah May kick her ass. But I think they still see Saraya as a star, but I just don't think the audience does. But May countered a DDT set up by Saraya with a roll-up 3 count, and Excalibur said she pulled that win out of thin air. So there you go. During the celebration, Mina Shirakawa ran on the stage and raised May's hand. Storm took exception and had words with Shirakawa, so they're shooting an angle for the pay-per-view. And then we get to the main event of 0 Hour, and we had the Lucha Brothers and Mystico versus Hiromu Takahashi, Teton, and Yota Tsuji. This was really cool, man. I really dug this match. I think they need to build up Mystico. They need to start building up now for Mystico to be in the main event of Forbidden Door next year. And he needs to win. I know what you're saying. It's like, Tony will never do that. Well, I think that if they want these shows to continue to be important, eventually it's going to have to, like, we're not going to be able to predict all the matches. And somebody from outside of this company is going to have to win their title. They've done it to other companies. John Moxley just won the IWGP, lost it, of course. And, of course, Kenny Omega and then Christian Cage won the Impact title back in the day. Eventually, somebody's going to have to come from outside the company. And I'm not counting the time that Minoru Suzuki won the Ring of Honor, like, whatever fucking title. I'm talking about, the AEW World title or something like that. Like, somebody from outside the company is going to have to win one of these belts in order for this Forbidden Door show to continue to be interesting. And it is still interesting to me. But we need more stakes involved, and we need some more interesting stuff. So I think the Mystico should be kind of at the top of this card next year. But I really like the match. It's everything that you thought it was going to be. Only 12 minutes long, but the Lucha Bros and Mystico, of course. Mystico's not losing. They got the victory. Mystico forced Teton to tap out. So good stuff. And then we go to the main show. And it opens up with the absolute dirt worst match of the night. MJF versus Hetto. Hetto is one of my new favorites. Hold on, swig of Coke Z for Hetto. He's one of my new favorites, but you can tell MJF wanted nothing to do with this match. Which, I don't know why he accepted the match if he didn't want anything to do with it. But I think it was just a way to get MJF on the show, and Hetto as a guy that you can just beat. But I really like him. He reminds me of back in the days of WCW when they would bring on like the Lucha guys, and they're always like really good. And he's like short, he's like kind of like thick and stocky, kind of like Silver King back in the day. Except for he is like I think he's much better wrestler than Silver King ever was, and Silver King was great, but he has a cool vibe to him, man. Cool gimmick. No, excuse me. He does the fire, all that stuff. But MJF was turning this into a gimmick match. He didn't really care to be there. You can tell. I did not really care about this match by the time it was over. But MJF bit Hetto, then hit a Panama Sunrise, followed by a Brainbuster suplex for the win. So there you go. 10 minutes. MJF wins in 10 minutes. And then we get the Young Bucks and Okada versus the Acclaimed and Hiroshi Tanahashi. Again, like, this was fun for what it was, but it wasn't like the awesome match that we thought it was going to be. And in fact, when I got to talk about Caster rapping on his way to the ring, he kept saying the B word a bunch of times. And I remember my wife walked in right when this happened. She's just trying to get like a snack for my kid. They're upstairs playing, and I'm watching it. And he said the B word like 8 times. And we're just like, what are you doing? You're an idiot. It wasn't funny. It wasn't clever. It wasn't anything. And then she looks at me. She's like, why is he saying that so many times? Like, I don't know. He's an idiot. And she like was embarrassed for me. So, but this match was fine. I mean, it wasn't like a great match. But the Young Bucks turned it up a notch here at a certain point during the match. But Okada slammed Tanahashi and then landed at the top rope elbow drop. He struck a pose for the crowd rather than go for the pin. Excalibur said he was showing no sense of urgency. Okada then gave a middle finger to the crowd, so he was teasing the Rainmaker pose and gave the middle finger. Okada finally went for a cover, but Tanahashi surprised him with a roll-up, and he fended off the Bucks. But then Okada landed a drop kick followed by the Rainmaker for a 3 count. You know, I know that Tanahashi's in the twilight of his career, but I don't know that we got to treat him like this. Every time he's on AEW, he loses. And he loses a lot in New Japan, too, and I just don't like it. He's a legend. You know, he shouldn't be wrestling that much. He wrestles too much, probably, and he loses too much. The brother's not moving around too great. Let's just say that. But I still love the guy. Next, we go to, in my opinion, the number 2 match of the night. This is my second favorite match of the night. Bryan Danielson versus Shingo Takagi. You know what? I think if you gave these guys some time and put them in the main event, they could have just as good a match as anybody in the world. And they have really good chemistry. And I thought they worked. I thought they worked out pretty well. Hold on, I got to answer this. I thought they worked out pretty well. But you know, Bryan Danielson got the victory here. So at this point, it's all AEW. And that's kind of like my only thing about these Forbidden Door shows. And I guess, you know, with the announcement of Wrestle Dynasty coming up on January 5th, you know, maybe New Japan will win some more matches, but they got 2 victories here tonight. But Nigel said Danielson should just stay down. Shingo drove elbows on Danielson, but Danielson countered into an armbar and torqued Shingo's wrist. They headbutted each other. Danielson escaped Shingo's grip and landed a high kick. He came back with a yes kick for a near fall. He followed with a series of body stomps and a triangle mid-ring and eventually got the tap out win. But yeah, it was a pretty sick submission. I really loved this match. It was great. Here's the problem with it. Danielson advancing in the Owen Hart tournament, he came out and said he wants nothing to do with that world title, but yet he's in a tournament for the world title, and I don't think that was a smart thing to say. I just don't. But I still love the guy. He's still, you know, one of the all-time great wrestlers ever. So next we go to Toni Storm versus Mina Shirakawa. More AEW getting victories. I mean, it's an AEW pay-per-view. I guess what should you expect? But they had a fun match. I dug it. 11 minutes. Toni Storm got the victory. She came out dressed as the Statue of Liberty. So good stuff. Storm landed a hip attack minutes later. Shirakawa came back with a leverage near fall. And then a spinning back fist. She let out a yell and landed a glamour driver for a near fall. And then Storm came back with a Storm Zero a minute later for the clean victory. Afterward, Storm helped Shirakawa up. Shirakawa shoved her, but then offered a handshake. Storm shook her hand as May encouraged a hug. They hugged and the crowd popped. And then all 3 smooched on the lips. So we got HLA here on AEW. Maybe they're going back to the Attitude Era after all. But I thought it was a pretty good match. It wasn't like Stardom level, you know what I mean? But you know, what do you expect? It's like 10-minute match. But I thought they did go with the time that they had, but it was enjoyable. But you know, and also Storm's kind of a gimmick, so she's not really having those Stardom level matches. But if you ever watch Stardom, like their matches are way better. They're pretty high caliber stuff. Up next is my third favorite match of the night. I dug this match, and maybe not everybody dug it, but I dug it. I just like both these guys. Like Orange Cassidy, it took him a while to win me over, but he finally did. And I've been a Zack Sabre Jr. fan since forever. My first ever independent show, Zack Sabre Jr. was on. The one that I went to anyway. So I've just been a big fan of his for a long time. I really love what he does. And I thought this was an interesting dynamic. It's probably not the match that I would have picked for Zack Sabre Jr., especially when Hechisero's like right there. But you can't have like a New Japan guy versus a CMLL guy on the show. You got to have AEW has to be represented in every match. But and then plus they just did it at Arena Mexico over the weekend. So, but Zack Sabre Jr. slapped Cassidy. Cassidy fired up, went for a leg lock. And then ZSJ tried to upkick out of it, but Cassidy instead flipped Zack Sabre Jr. over into the modified sharpshooter. Then Zack wriggled out and then slammed Zack to the mat and scored a near fall. Cassidy hit an orange punch, but Sabre fired back with a kick. They engaged in leverage pins and reversals. Cassidy leveraged back with his hands in his pockets, but Sabre powered out. Cassidy did it again, but Sabre powered out. And then Sabre then applied a submission hold, torquing Cassidy's ankle and got the tap out win. Yeah, he had him like wrapped up in a pretzel, man, and got the tap out win. You know, I think people were Like, I don't know why people were surprised by this. Saber's a pushed guy in New Japan, and I think he might actually win the G1 this year. So it makes sense that he would win. And finally, New Japan got a win on the show, and that was important. To this point, like New Japan or Stardom representative hadn't even gotten a victory yet. And so I think he needed the win here, and Cassidy is kind of like bulletproof at this point. He's losing a lot more this year. Before 2024, like you had to shoot Cassidy with a gun to get him, to pin him for a 3 count. But and then we go to Joe, Hook, and Shibata versus the Learning Tree and Jeff Cobb. The only thing I really cared about was Jeff Cobb versus Samoa Joe. We got to see him for a little bit, but I did not quite wet my beak on that one. I wanted more of that. But the match was much better than what I had anticipated. So that was the good news. But Joe, Hook, and Shibata got the victory. And Hook actually got the pin over Chris Jericho, which is pretty cool. I wasn't expecting that. I honestly figured that Joe, Hook, and Shibata would win, but I didn't think that that Jericho would be the one getting beat. So I thought that was kind of cool. But look, a solid match. And then we go to the crazy ass ladder match. Perry, Phantasmo, Martin, Mark Briscoe, Leo Rush, and Takeshita. Best moment of the night was when Mark Briscoe was diving off the big ladder through a table to the floor. And I think Dante Martin was on the table, and he just landed on that fucker, and it just didn't break. And then, Briscoe, no sold it, of course. Well, I mean, he sold it in the context of the show, but it didn't affect him. Like, the guy's just way too tough to keep down. So, but Jack Perry got this. I can't do a recap for this one. It was crazy. I'll be honest, I'm kind of I'm not exactly over the ladder matches, but there is diminishing returns on this thing. If they didn't have it, I'd have been fine. In fact, this match, how long was this match? Let me see if Keller's got that on. He actually doesn't have the time for this match on here, but I was like, yeah, you probably could have taken this one out and you'd have been fine. And that way, some of us can go back to our families, but it was tons of spots, all kinds of stuff. I think the most over guy in the match, but by far was Mark Briscoe, but the Takeshita was probably next to him. So that was pretty cool. I think Takeshi's got something, man. And hopefully AEW really gets behind him. Mercedes Moné versus Stephanie Vaquer. As far as the 2 women's matches or the 3 women's matches, I thought this was the best one of the night. At some point, the crowd turned on Mercedes. They think she's from Boston, but she's actually from California. She only reps Boston when it's convenient because she thinks Boston is trendy, and that's her whole deal. She tries to be trendy. But another solid match. Look, I've been tough on Mercedes since she's been here in AEW because I don't find her promos to be very good. I think she's bad at dancing, and I think she does a lot of dancing, but she's not even good. But she's really good at the wrestling, and so is Stephanie Vaquer. And I think Stephanie Vaquer is going to be a big star. And if CMLL, I would be leery of old Tony. He's going to try to take that one. 100%, he's going to try to take her. You can't blame the guy. She's fantastic, and he's going to have to take her before WWE does because I bet they would want her too, especially being from Ecuador and stuff. It makes her unique. That's cool, man. But she's tremendous, and now Mercedes, she won the match. She got with the bank statement. I don't know what she calls it now, but it used to be called the bank statement. And then now she has the AEW mid-card title and the New Japan mid-card title, and she's crying and shit. She's looking at it I'm started crying, and she holds the belts up, and all of a sudden DMD hits the stage. Britt Baker herself, she's returned, and she stares down Mercedes, and it looks like that's going to be the match that comes up next. And then we got a commercial hyping the January 4th Wrestle Kingdom. And then New Japan Dynasty on January 5th. So this is going to be Japan's version of the Forbidden Door. I think last year it was on January 20th or something like that. It was like almost like 2 weeks later that they had Wrestle Dynasty in the Dome. And, you know, they had like people from Noah there. It was a big show. But this year, this coming up year, they're going to do Wrestle Dynasty, and it's going to be their version of the Forbidden Door, but it's going to be hosted by New Japan in the Tokyo Dome, featuring AEW, CMLL, and they Stardom, and then they actually said Ring of Honor too, I think. So that's pretty cool, man. I dug it, and I'm looking forward to that. But you know, back-to-back nights, that's going to be tough, man. So that might like for 2 nights in a row, that might be. You know, take me a week to watch. I'm gonna have to devote like an entire week of getting up early and like spend an hour a day just watching that shit. That's a lot, man. It's a lot to ask of an audience, especially when you have other stuff to do. But I'm looking forward to it. It should be fun. And then next up, we go to I'm gonna go ahead and say this: the most disappointing match of the night. Jon Moxley versus Tetsuya Naito. Poor Naito, man. He is washed. He is completely washed. The last match they had in Chicago, I thought was pretty good. And I don't know how he got so much worse between, you know, April and now, but boy, he just did not look like he wanted to be there. Him and Moxley had no chemistry. They were botching moves left and right. A lot of people are going to say, say that this winded up being a good match, but I'll be honest, like I felt like the Hechicero and MJF match was a little bit worse than this. She said it wasn't that entertaining. But yeah, this one just wasn't good. Like they just had no chemistry. They're botching stuff. At one point, like they botched a Destino, which that's his finishing move, and he botched this on finishing move he's been doing for 20 years. And then they ended up hitting it again, and he got the victory there. Naito did. But yeah, he is Naito is completely washed. New Japan's main event scene is tough now that Okada and Osprey and Jay White and all these guys have left, and they're hoping that Yota Tsuji and those guys and Ren Narita and Shota Umino, who I think has got an injury right now, and of course Uemura, Impact legend Uemura. They're hoping that they can get up to that level, but they're just not there yet, and then so you got Naito out there half-assing it. And it was the most disappointing match of the night. It was one of the ones I was looking forward to the most, and it just turned out to be like super disappointing. So yeah, that sucks. But Naito's got the belt back, so New Japan fans can rest easy. They did not like the fact that Moxley was the champion. And Moxley seems like he'd rather be doing anything else other than working AEW at this point. So they got too much WWE bullshit going on over there. But yeah, not a great match. But yeah, let's go ahead and get into this main event, man. This is a 5-star classic, but most importantly, and I think this is the most important thing that's going to come out of this show. Swerve Strickland has arrived. Swerve Strickland is now a major main event player in pro wrestling. He's here. He's done it. And I've been on this guy's side for a long time. I watched him in MLW. I watched him in Lucha Underground. I watched a little bit of stuff in NXT. And then when he came over to AEW, I was like, finally, he's like in the right spot. And then I just didn't feel like they were going to get behind him. And then at the beginning of the year, it's like, oh man, got some momentum. And then he won the title against Samoa Joe. And the title win was cold, to be honest with you. And he started to lose some momentum, believe it or not. Once he won the title, he lost a little bit of momentum. And I was disappointed in that. And then his first opponent was Christian Cage. And while I love Christian Cage, I felt like that was a weak opponent for a main event spot on a pay-per-view and for a world title match, especially because he was coming off of a loss. And so they did a good job telling the story about how Christian got the title match. But still, like if you take it into the context of sports, and this is a sports-based promotion, I thought it was weak. But he remained strong. He remained steadfast. He was still continuing to have good matches and good segments. And this little feud, babyface versus babyface feud with Osprey, started off a little bit like we wanted to see it, but we're like, what's it going to be? But then they cranked up the heat on those promos. And I think those promos put the interest level on this over the top. They got personal in their promos without turning heel. And that's a talent. That really is a talent. I thought he did a great job. and the interest level was up. And by the time this match started, the crowd heat was amazing. It was the most over match of the night. And it's like we're like 5 hours in at this point. And everybody's going crazy. And they went crazy for him. Jim Jones wrapped him to the ring or introduced him, and then they hit the swerve song to the ring, and they're doing the swerve dance. And the guy looks like, acts like, and comes across like, and works like a major pro wrestling star. He has arrived. It is now the Swerve Strickland era, and Will Osprey plays a part in that because he worked his ass off to get this guy over. He really did. And in the context of the match, they had the ref bump, which is kind of lame, but it made sense that because they're trying to keep Osprey strong too. So a Swerve basically had to kill him to get this victory. And that's smart because they want Osprey to have this spot eventually. But Osprey really has been the top babyface in the company since he arrived. I think that flip-flop tonight. But that doesn't mean that Osprey lost a step. I think that he just helped elevate Swerve to his level. And then eventually we're going to get this rematch. And Osprey is going to have to get the title at some point. So I don't know if we're going to get the rematch I don't know if Osprey will beat him for the title. Like, Swerve's going to lose the title eventually, of course. Then at some point, Osprey's got to get it at Wembley Stadium in the UK. Obviously not happening this year, but it's going to happen. And I'm really looking forward to it. But, I already kicked off of Wade Keller's recap here. And because I just can't do justice with the play-by-play because they hit so many moves and they did a ton of stuff. At one point they Osprey hit the hidden blade and we thought it was going to be the finish, but he hit the hidden blade and the referee, and then Don Callis tries to give him a screwdriver. He comes out, he sees Nana pushed over Don Callis, and he's like about to kill Prince Nana with the screwdriver, and then he thinks better of it, tosses the screwdriver, and then Swerve Strickland has to hit him with like 10 moves. It's like 10 finishers in a row to beat him, but it worked, man. Look, sometimes I'm like too many kickouts is lame, but Osprey knows how to do it, and he times them perfectly. The match ruled, man. This was an all-time great. It's gonna be one of the match of the year candidates. It's gonna be difficult to beat, and I think historical significance is gonna be on the side of this one because this was the night that Swerve Strickland became a megastar. He is it. He is the top guy, bar none, in AEW right now, and it is about time. He is fantastic, and this show was really good. As far as like Forbidden Doors go, it's like 3 of 3. This is the third installment, and this was like third on the list, but it was still very good. Just a lot of the matches that came before it, they never really reached the level that we saw in years prior. I think, I'll be honest, and like smartly so, I think a lot of people were saving some stuff for the main event. Plus, they just had too many matches, so which means they had to cut time for all the other matches. So you got like Danielson and Shingo going like 15 minutes when we probably, if they went 25, that's a match of the year candidate. You know what I mean? So if they took out that ladder match, they took out the Jericho. Well, Jericho, I just don't like the learning tree. But if they took out a few of those and just let Danielson and Shingo go, and Saber and Orange Cassidy get a couple more minutes, I think you're probably looking at like 3 or 4 5-star matches on one pay-per-view. But and I'm not complaining that they didn't have that. I think honestly that's sometimes a little too much because you just forget the greatness. But I think this night you're gonna remember the match between Osprey and Swerve Strickland because you didn't have 3 or 4 5-star matches on the undercard. You had good matches, entertaining matches. You moved stories along. And you had a cool mix of New Japan and CMLL and AEW and all that. But they saved a lot for the main event. I think that was smart. I don't hate it. I don't hate it at all. But Forbidden Door, I think was a really fun show. And I think that is going to do it for us. If you're listening on Patreon, we'll be back this weekend for Brace for Impact. So check that out. And JD and I will try to figure out if we can get together this coming up weekend to record some more stuff for you guys. If news breaks, we'll try to cover it. And if you're on the Voices of Wrestling feed, thank you for being here. Stay tuned for um, uh, a compilation of the Who Killed WCW series. I put all 4 episodes together, all 4 of our reaction shows together, and put it in a little bit of a compilation for you guys. So I hope you guys enjoy that. And if you want more stuff like that, head to patreon.com/the Mike and JD show. Become a Patreon subscriber today. And you could have had this show, this Forbidden Door recap show on Monday night. And could have joined me live and in living color on Monday night. Or would have had it in your podcast feed early Tuesday morning. So join us over at patreon.com/the Mike and JD show. Hold on. We got to give a big shout out to Billy. Hey, Billy, what's up, man? He says Mystico is an international star right now and feels like a big deal. Yeah. I think that, I think AEW and CMLL need to get together and figure out a way for next year Forbidden Door for Mystico to be in that main event. Or maybe they're just going to save that for like an Arena Mexico Forbidden Door type show. Now that New Japan's getting one, I think that probably like next year, maybe we'll get one in CMLL. Maybe like each one will host their own. And whoever's hosting will have like the most wins. I think that's what they'll probably do. Like AEW's like fitting the bill on this one. So like, hey, we're going to beat everybody's asses, but New Japan will give you 2 victories. We'll give you your title back. And we'll let Zack Sabre Jr. get a win over Orange Cassidy. So I can see that. But all right, guys. Hey, that is going to do it for me this time. And until next time, mahalo. So Vice, man, they started the Who Killed WCW series, and we got a chance to watch episode 1. And what did you think of the first show, man?
It was all right. Like, it was all right. Like, kind of like, I don't want to like boil this down because I think it made me think of Iron Claw a little bit. Now that being said, I thought the Iron Claw was a much better product, but it's like when you know the story, like you immediately have to cock an eyebrow to everything anybody says because you just sniff agendas. And like like with most Dark Side stuff, it's well produced, looks good, sounds good. But like I feel like it's almost like I'm going to McDonald's, right? Like smells fine, looks fine, it's a clean restaurant. I sit down, and it's still a McDonald's cheeseburger at the end of the day. And nothing I can do is going to change the fact that you're trying to serve me a shitty McDonald's cheeseburger.
Yeah. So I guess I kind of look at it differently. I know you're like a documentary guy, and I'm a very big documentary guy. And there's a few things that I expect out of my documentaries. One, am I going to learn something new? That's very important to me. I love learning new things. 2, are you going to entertain me? Because I think that is important to people. Like entertaining somebody in a documentary is kind of a lost art. And I think some do it much better than others. And 3, am I going to get to relive some old memories, specifically from my childhood? And what I mean by that is like, okay, clearly I'm not watching World War II documentaries, despite what my airman would say, because I'm reliving old childhood memories. No, but I'm learning something, and I happen to enjoy those.
Vicious.
And yeah. But if I'm watching something from my childhood, yeah, I'm going to get to relive some of the old stories. Some of them I know, some of them I don't know. But at least at the very end, they will be somewhat entertaining. With this one, they didn't hit all of my expectations, but I did find it to be entertaining. And I did get to relive some childhood memories, so that's always fun. Unfortunately, I didn't get to learn anything new, but I did get to hear from new people that I've never heard from before. Specifically, Brad Siegel, I thought was pretty refreshing to have that guy on the show. Because I've always heard for years that it was Brad Siegel and Jamie Kellner. They're the 2 guys that killed WCW. Brad Siegel always hated wrestling. He hated wrestling and yada, yada. And then here he comes on to Who Killed WCW and admits that he hated wrestling.
He hates wrestling.
My favorite line was whenever he found out that TNT was coming to, or WCW was coming to TNT, and he was like, I just got done making this brand into like a well-respected brand, and now we're going to put stupid wrestling on it. I disagree with his opinion about wrestling, but I find the fact that he's just so matter of fact about it and unabashedly putting his opinion out there that he hates professional. I found it to be refreshing. I thought he was awesome.
I agree. I mean, what I like about talking to guys like this, and this is why I think Guy Evans did such a good job with the Nitro book, is it's nice talking to people because again, we're too far, we're too deep in the forest to see the trees. Sometimes, like we live, eat, and breathe pro wrestling, right? So it's nice to hear from people who really don't give a fuck about it, and it helps give you some perspective, right? because we get wrapped up in the minutia. And you talked a little bit earlier about like documentaries being entertaining and their movies. People forget that about their documentary. This, speaking from a guy who has a degree, this is literally what my degree is in. It's in documentary filmmaking. Like a documentary is not journalism, right?
Yeah.
The idea of a documentarian is to tell a story using real life, right? But you come at it with an agenda. You have a story to tell. The job of the documentarian is not to present truth. The job of the documentarian is to present a story. So I know that going in, right? My qualm is the stories that get told. That's where I'm like, so what, like if the agenda is, are you doing propaganda? Or are you doing, are you in a quest for some sort of truth? So if you're doing propaganda stuff like Triumph of the Will, which is this documentary that was made by Leni Riefenstahl in 1936, she filmed the 1936 Olympics that were hosted in Berlin. And Hitler basically instructed her to make this film to glorify Germany and show the world why Germany is the best and why we do this stuff right. And then Jesse Owens kept winning gold medals and Hitler kept getting pissed off. But I mean, it's all, I mean, like, is
that the documentary where they're filming Hitler like tweaking balls on amphetamines in the stands, like shaking back and forth and scratching his arms and stuff like that?
That would be the one.
Yeah. I mean, I've never seen the movie, but I've seen that clip specifically has been passed around forever.
So it's a very well-made movie. She was so ahead of the time with what she could do with the camera, specifically with sports footage, right? It's a guy who's like really my major interest is sports documentary. And she was the first person to incorporate slow motion. Like she had these amazing shots of divers and runners moving in slow motion. It's an incredible film. It truly is, but it's a piece of Nazi propaganda.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, that was the job. That was her job, was to glorify the Reich, you know, and she did.
Yeah.
So, but I mean, like you have to understand why you can say something is good and say, well, the agenda, pisses me off for X, and that's perfectly fine. Like you need that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing about it is, I don't know what the agenda is of the documentary yet, because I don't know that they're actually at the end of episode 4. It's a 4-part series, so we'll do this every week until it's over. I'm having trouble because I didn't know what the agenda of episode 2 was, and it was clearly just to set the table. Or I'm sorry, episode 1. It was it was really just establishing the characters, establishing Eric Bischoff as this guy that come over like this humble servant coming over from the AWA and reinventing WCW. He really did. He did a lot of innovative stuff, had a ton of great ideas. And I think that, early, like a lot of those, 1994 WCW on into, whenever he left, he had a ton of great ideas during that time. Ultimately, obviously failed, but we do have to give the devil his due a little bit. He did bring over a bunch of great ideas, but they're establishing the characters, but they're not really like pointing the finger just yet. And I think maybe that's what the audience was wanting. They're wanting like everybody on camera in unison to say that Eric Bischoff killed WCW, when really, you're going to get a wide variety of opinions there. And I think the only guy that was willing to say that was Bret Hart. He was like very matter-of-factly about it, like say, yeah, it was Bischoff.
Bret don't care. And like Bret's the only guy who doesn't give a flying fuck about trying to stay in the WWE's good graces. Bret could care less. So here's my qualm with all this: is the vibe that I got off the show is it felt like the Eric Bischoff reclamation project. Right now, I could be wrong. I could be at the end of the day, they are going to paint Bischoff as the guy who was responsible for it. But the fact that he's so directly involved with the production, and the fact that the Dark Side guys have slipped a little bit over the years as far as how they cover these things, and they're now part of the system. They're not guys that operate outside the system now. Like they're firmly entrenched in it.
So JD, Eric Bischoff had a podcast last week, or I think it was earlier this week. Might have been Monday. Guess who his 2 guests were?
That's what I thought.
Yeah,
Halsey
Brian Gewirtz. It was Brian Gewirtz and one of the Dark Side guys. I can't remember if it was Evan Husney or it was the other guy.
Yeah, I don't like it. So I mean, like, and this is the vibe. This is the vibe that you get off of it. And Eric has very much tried to defend himself as being the guy responsible for it, because, quite frankly, he's the guy responsible for it. He killed WCW.
I think he's the main culprit. A lot of people contributed to it, but I think he,
for sure.
He's patient zero. It's kind of like, Ken Burns had that old quote about, how a lot of people in the South were trying to say that the Civil War wasn't about slavery. And he was like, a lot of things contributed to the Civil War, I'm sorry. But one thing caused it, and it was slavery. A lot of things contributed to the death of WCW, and one thing caused it. It was Eric Bischoff's mismanagement, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was the initial, like the free fall without a parachute started on his watch. His lack of leadership, his lack of foresight, and essentially losing control of the company. It started with him, with all the people that he had hired, and they were losing tens of millions of dollars on his watch. And then, of course, a bunch of bad decisions ultimately led to the death. But it was on his watch.
So I'm going to push back a little bit on this because the company had been in free fall from its inception until Eric Bischoff comes in, and it still takes a couple years for it not to be in free fall. WCW was a money loser for all but 2 years of its existence.
Yeah,
all but 3 years of its existence. Excuse me. So, like, the fact that you have to give him credit for one sticking to his plan, because he takes over in '93. And it's not until 96 that they start, turning things around. It took a long time. And like a lot of that was, I believe it was you who praised them for, and it was one of our text threads. You praised them for the Disney move, which saved them a lot of money, made for some really bad TV.
Yeah, well, and I thought it was a brilliant move, getting them off of the road. We actually talked about it. We didn't talk about WCW doing it on the podcast on the Mike and JD show, but we've been talking about TNA possibly doing that, kind of going back to their roots and going back to an Impact Zone type of setting or Full Sail University. AEW moving Collision to Arlington, coming up with a residency for the next couple of months. And we're praising them. Well, not that he came up with the idea. Studio Wrestling has been around forever, but he had the foresight to take WCW off of the road because they're a money loser and move them to Disney MGM Studios. And the show looked great, well lit, always had a fresh audience. That part was great. But again, it also he could not manage it well enough because they were shooting, 5-6 times a day, doing months in advance. And it really had a negative impact on the overall storytelling of the show.
Yeah, the show sucked. Right, like worldwide, it worked. Like they filled their syndication. It really helps tell the fan base that syndicated WCW television didn't matter, right? And it was decisions like this that I think eventually did kill like syndicated wrestling in general, because because remember, back in the 80s, syndication was the prime. That's where everything happened. The one exception was WCW, right? I mean, the WCW show, World Championship Wrestling, which eventually morphed into WCW Saturday Night, right?
Yeah,
that was a cable show. Sure.
JD, can you explain that real quick? Because I just got into an argument with somebody about this on Facebook, and I don't know why I engaged, because I'm above it. Actually,
why are you fighting with wrestling fans on Facebook? You're beyond this.
I know. I'm 41 years old. What am I doing? Get a life, Gilbert. But can you just explain what WCW was, and then exactly what Ted Turner bought and turned it into WCW in 1988?
Okay, so when we say WCW, when we usually we're referring to the promotion of World Championship Wrestling. The World Championship Wrestling name carries over from the television show, which started off as Georgia Championship Wrestling in 1974. That was on WTCG television. Eventually, WTCG becomes WTBS, Turner Broadcasting System, right? And that was Ole's promotion, right? There have been other promotions. Paul Jones had ran stuff, and Ray and Ann Gunkel ran stuff. So there's always TV in Georgia wrestling, but eventually it's Ole's show that becomes that starts as Georgia Championship Wrestling and then becomes World Championship Wrestling. In the late 70s, it becomes the most popular wrestling show on cable, because cable is new and WTBS is a superstation. There was a handful of what they called superstations in the country that got to get broadcasting cable. We had one in Chicago, WGN. New York had WOR.
LA had KTLA.
LA, KTLA. So we didn't get that in Chicago. So I actually didn't know that until you just said that.
Yeah.
So, but there was a handful of superstations that literally had their stuff broadcast across the country. Now, because of that, the territory system starts to crumble. People blame Vince. In reality, it's Turner that starts the end of the territory system, because so many people were able to watch World Championship Wrestling on TBS. And it changed its name to World Championship because people in Ohio started watching. Specifically, Dayton, Ohio becomes the first place where these start to crack. You know, they have a deal with the Tunnies up in Toronto. All of a sudden, things start to move and start to change. So the show is World Championship Wrestling. Vince, Black Saturday, buys the promotion, buys Georgia Championship Wrestling promotion, and takes, not because he wanted to run those towns, but because he wanted that TBS time slot. So the World Championship Wrestling TV show becomes a WWF TV show in '84, and they actually reverted the name back to Georgia Championship Wrestling, which is interesting. I've always thought that was an interesting move, that it became Georgia Championship Wrestling again, but it had the same exact intro, and then Vince sells that spot back to Crockett, and it becomes once again World Championship Wrestling. Funny part is they had the same exact intro for all three promotions. That famous intro. Yeah.
Did Vince not own the name World Championship Wrestling when he bought the time slot? Did he not own it?
I thought he did.
Because he bought Georgia Championship Wrestling, and I thought he owned. Maybe we'll have to do some research on that. Maybe for like next episode, we'll clarify. I could have swore he owned the name World Championship Wrestling, because Ole Anderson then starts Championship Wrestling from Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, very very clever. And then they get on TBS, and then when Vince then sells to Crockett, that's when WCW, the World Championship Wrestling TV show, comes back. And then Crockett's got that show, and then Championship Wrestling from Georgia is still a thing for a little bit.
For just a little bit, then it pretty much gets absorbed into Crockett. Like Crockett bought it, and so what's interesting happening is like the show is called Georgia Championship Wrestling, but it still has the World Championship Wrestling intro. Like it still says World Championship Wrestling on the thing. Weird. So at the time when Vince is on TBS, you also have Ole's shows in the mornings, right? The Championship Wrestling from Georgia. By the way, shitty shows. You also have Watts's UWF Mid-South, is also on TBS at the same time. So TBS has three different wrestling promotions at the same time going. What show won? What show outdrew? Watts is number one. When Vince wanted to get rid of it, Watts thought the spot was his. Crockett snuck it out from underneath him. And then, so that that's that whole thing that brings that into place. So the show continues through, right? Crockett buys the UWF, Mid-South Watts, and that becomes part of it. And then eventually the show, TBS, or Turner, I should say, buys Crockett, not the NWA, but Crockett. Yeah. And originally it was called Universal Wrestling Corporation in '89. It was still NWA, we wrestle, and it was the Universal Wrestling Corporation. And then in 1990, they decided to rebrand the company WCW, World Championship Wrestling. They renamed the company, I should say, after the TV show. That is WCW. Yes. So that is the abbreviated history of how we got WCW as a name. What exactly were you fighting about?
I said that TNA outlasted WCW and ECW. And I said, they've lasted twice as long as either one of those companies. Mm-hmm. And technically I'm correct, because WCW wasn't established until, you can say 1988, but 1990 is like when the LLC WCW was created. Mm-hmm. I didn't say it was on longer than the World Championship Wrestling TV show, because that show was on for 20 years or whatever, 25 years. So on Saturday nights at 6:05, it was on for a long time, right? Mm-hmm. So that was the argument. I was like trying to give the guy a history lesson. He just wasn't having it. And I was like, oh, wait a minute, you're stupid. What am I doing? Why am I talking to this moron about the history of pro wrestling when clearly he has no idea what he's talking about? So I was trying to be matter of fact to defend my video. But anyway.
But here's the problem with that, and this is where I take up issue with stuff like this, is because WWE has taken control of the wrestling history narrative, and they tell their version of history, and oftentimes they don't talk about that like they did. I did not see the Black Saturday episode. Did you see the Black Saturday episode?
I did, and I enjoyed it, because that was the first time I had seen Gerald Briscoe kind of talk publicly and honestly about it.
How accurate were they? Like, were they pretty good, or were they giving you a WWE homogenized version of history?
I didn't see any connection to WWE whatsoever on that.
That's good. Okay.
I thought it was pretty good. Did they leave a lot of stuff out? Yeah, I mean, it's a 45-minute show, and it really could have been a 40-hour documentary. Yeah,
for sure. Like I said, Ken Burns' History of Professional Wrestling documentary that exists in one of the alternate universes is a phenomenal thing. Unfortunately, the only guy that can make that documentary is no longer interested in doing those sorts of things. So,
unless you're a billionaire and you want to fit the bill on that one.
yes. Yeah, I'll do that, by the way. If Tony Khan wants to pay me to do that, I'll be more than happy to do that. Like, so that's my qualm, though, is like their version of history often becomes like the version of history. And that bothers me because, like, you get arguments like this. Like, I had an argument with the guy once. He's like, WCW didn't come up till 1990. And I showed him the picture of Vince standing in front of the WCW logo. And he said I created an AI.
Yeah.
I was just like, okay, you're a fucking tool.
Yeah. Like at that point, the conversation just has to end at that. I was like, okay, you're not a serious person.
Yeah.
Speaking of not a serious person, a couple more notes on this WCW episode, or Who Killed WCW episode 1, and then we'll send it on home. So Eric Bischoff lie tracker. I only really tracked, I think, 2 specific lies that he spewed. If he had an opinion about something, that's just his opinion. I'm not gonna say he's lying about his opinion, right?
Okay.
So, but one thing specifically stuck out, and I think it's been covered on other podcasts, but I feel like if we didn't talk about it here, we'd be fools. Him saying that whenever he left AWA to go to WCW, at that point he had not ever heard of WCW. That is such bullshit. There is no possible way. Now, before he went to AWA and got hired by AWA, is it possible that he had never heard of WCW? Yeah, if he's not a wrestling fan, maybe he doesn't know. But he's working in the business he worked in AWA for 5 years. There was a connection, like talent jumped back and forth between Crockett and the AWA. Of course he knew what WCW was.
Can I be honest with you? I actually kind of believe Eric in this, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
Here's why. He's a fucking idiot.
Oh, there you go. Okay. Yep.
He's an idiot. Like, here's why I completely think Eric might be right.
Counterpoint, JD, you win.
Like, he doesn't pay attention to wrestling ever. Yeah. Like, he brought his big answer to everything was, well, what's Vince doing? We'll do that. Like, I believe that now I also think that he might not have known, because he did sign with WCW in 1991. So by that point, they are WCW.
Yeah.
So the fact that he said, I don't know what WCW is, makes kind of sense, because WCW in itself really wasn't a thing until 1990, at which point they're struggling to keep the AWA alive. And nobody would have said in 1990, I'm jumping to WCW. They would have said, I'm going to the NWA, or I'm going to Crockett, or I'm going to Atlanta. So I can kind of believe in Eric's version of things, taking into consideration that he's a complete and total idiot who has a terrible memory. And I kind of believe that I think he believes that he didn't know what WCW was. I don't think he's trying to massage a message here. I think he's just a fucking idiot.
I see your point, and I accept that counterpoint there.
Thank you.
The other one, and I don't know that it's so much a lie. I wish we could get Sting's opinion on this, but he said, WCW 97 or Starrcade 97, which I've been saying since Starrcade, or since WCW died, that Starrcade 1997 was like the first bullet in
100%.
Into the death of WCW.
Mm-hmm.
Like they said, death of 1,000 paper cuts. That was, I feel like that was the first significant blow to WCW. They lost a ton of consumer confidence. The show had just gotten too wacky, way too out of hand, and the inmates are completely running the asylum at that point, with Hulk Hogan refusing to do the job.
I hate that. Right? I hate that phrase, but keep going.
Okay, sorry. But you get what I'm saying. Like Hogan has way too much power at that point, and the whole Sting just didn't seem like he was with it. He starts saying, Sting came in. He didn't really seem like he was into it. He just didn't seem himself. Back in the day, he was talking about how Sting didn't have a tan. He didn't say it on this documentary, the tan thing, but he said Sting didn't really seem with it. Didn't seem like he was interested. Didn't seem like he was into it, and ultimately talked himself out of winning the match, going into it thinking that Hogan was screwing him, and then Hogan ended up screwing him. I found the beginning of that argument, or beginning of what he was saying, to be truthful or to be a lie, and then he ended up telling the truth by the end of it, saying that Sting came in there to thinking that Hogan was going to screw them, and with his body language, Hogan ended up screwing him with that whole thing. I think by the end of it, he told the truth.
No, I agree with you on that. I think here's why I don't like the phrase inmates running the asylum. That is okay. So Frankie Kazarian just said this about AEW, and like this is the things that people say when they don't have any really good ideas and they want people to do things for them, and they want work to be handed to them. These are things like anyone who's like super creative and appreciates their creative freedom and has like a boss or someone that tells you that allows you to express yourself creatively and to be involved in what you're doing. That's, I mean, like no one who appreciates those things will say, well, the inmates running the asylum. That's uncreative people who want everything handed to them and don't want to be told what to do. That's what they say. Now, that being said, Hulk Hogan has way too much power and authority in this company at this point. Eric Bischoff doesn't ever say no to anybody. People say the inmates run the asylum. That just means that no one's listening to what you have to say because you don't have any stroke. Right. That's the problem. Yeah. Hogan was a problem. The problem is that Eric Bischoff didn't curb enough to say, Hogan, no, because like we've gone back and looked in history. George Scott was a terrible booker, except for large periods where he booked Crockett. And it turns out that he just let Flair and Mulligan do what they wanted, and they drew a lot of money. Is that the inmates running the asylum, or is that listening to your guys who know what they're doing and allowing themselves to create and express themselves? Right? It's inmates running the asylum when it doesn't work. When it does work, we're letting people create.
Well, it's inmates running the asylum when nobody respects the boss, and that's clearly what was happening with Eric Bischoff. So that was the context that I was using. Nobody respected Eric Bischoff.
No, I just hate that. I just hate that phrasing. I wanted to get on my soapbox.
That's all I meant. I mean, the same could be true for a football team, right? Like the players don't have any respect for the coach. They're going to go to practice when they want. Quarterback's going to call whatever plays. Like quarterback is going to call whatever plays. Like last year, Jameis Winston got a play from his coach of the New Orleans Saints. And then just didn't do the play as called. He ended up getting himself fired. But like that's all I meant about that is that Hogan, the NWO, Hall and Nash, Randy Savage, they all had way too much power, and they refused to do a lot of things. A big part of what killed WCW was them having too much power, them not going on the road and working house shows, them not appearing where they're supposed to be appearing, false advertising, and a complete loss of consumer confidence is what killed WCW.
No, and I agree. I just hate that phrase because it takes the idea that anybody who works for somebody, like if you have a job and your job is to be creative, clearly you're just crazy and like you're essentially in a prison. And like I hate that idiom because it totally devalues the people that work there. And I heard Frankie Kazarian say that, and I lost all respect for him because he just bitched and bitched and bitched. And he's in TNA. He's not doing anything interesting now either. So boo fucking who, Frankie. Sorry.
And I don't think Frankie knows who his boss is right now. Because the boss they did have got fired, and then they brought in two new guys, and I doubt they have a relationship. But you're
right.
Is it
you're
possible
spot on right.
Good. Is it possible that that there's a lot of talent in that locker room that don't respect Tony Khan?
Oh yeah, 100%. 100%.
Yeah.
I think it's like that anywhere you go. There's a lot of people in every job who don't respect the dude in charge. Yep. Right. It's all a matter of, it's all a matter of how that guy handles it. Right. And I think that Tony Khan needs to say know a lot more that. And I think getting rid of Punk was a good step in that direction because like they did have a CM Hogan like figure in AEW, and it kind of was Punk. Right. Yeah. He was kind of telling people how things were going to go, and he was on the show. So I mean, like, sure. That being said, Hogan completely tanked Sting. He completely tanked a year and a half long storyline because it benefited him.
And then you got to look at it from Bischoff's perspective, not to play devil's advocate with Bischoff, not to have his back a little bit. The whole reason why they're as successful as they are is because he was able to bring Hogan over. Hogan was a boon to that. Like he totally revitalized that company and then the NWO, of course, that angle made them into the number one company in the world. But without Hogan, that doesn't work.
That's bullshit. Here's why that's bullshit. That's true for the Bash at the Beach in 1996 or 94, excuse me. When Hogan comes in the Bash at the Beach 94, you get one of the biggest pay-per-views of all time. By the end of the year, the pay-per-views are exactly where they were before and TV ratings are lower. So what success did they really get with Hulk Hogan? They got a little bit more
They
mainstream
had that peak
publicity,
initially, but the NWO doesn't work as well without Hogan, I don't think.
No, I agree with that. No, that I agree with.
Yeah.
The NWO
That's
works
what I was
better
meaning.
with Hulk Hogan. Yeah. But I mean, he gets this whole like, well, they're nothing without Hogan. And it's like, okay, that initial Hulk Hogan stuff peters out remarkably fast. Like they really did the Hogan stuff really ostracizes the WCW fan base. And it very much reminds me kind of what we've seen in AEW over the last couple of years, where you bring in this influx of people from the other place who are famous in the other place, and it just doesn't work the same. You give the wrong people power, and then all of a sudden you're worse off than where you were before. So that's what happened in 94, 95. 1995 WCW is unwatchable until you get to Nitro. Right.
So,
and
some of the worst stuff that you'll ever watch in your life happened in 1995 WCW.
and WWF might be worse, to be honest. Pro wrestling in 1985 is just not good in the main two companies. It's just not good at all. So like, you got to understand. So Hogan is a big part of this. The problem with Hulk Hogan is he convinced everybody that he was the reason. The draw is Sting. That's the biggest pay-per-view that WCW ever did. And the reason why it's because the people wanted to see Sting. They didn't. They wanted to see Sting beat Hogan. And they had
the perfect heel in Hogan, who was one of the great heels ever, I think.
He was.
And then they had the perfect babyface in Sting. And Hogan fucked it up.
Yep. But it's fine because Hulk Hogan is a remarkably selfish human being. And he wound up being just perfectly fine. See, Hogan doesn't give a fuck that he killed WCW. Also, they go, well, it wasn't Vince's company, brother, and it didn't have the leadership, blah, blah, blah. And like, that is a guy that was never once looked in the mirror and said, boy, you know what? I'm a fucking problem. Like that guy, is one of the most immature, irresponsible, narcissistic parasites that's ever befallen professional wrestling. And yeah, he was remarkably successful in his day. And there's never been a guy who's been over as Hulk Hogan. But at the same time, he killed WCW. He's a big he is like the cocaine that Eric Bischoff just wouldn't let go of. Like Eric Bischoff was like an addict for Hulk Hogan. Like he just keeps coming back to him and keeps coming back to him. And Dave even said in the show today that, you know, Eric believed that whoever controlled Hulk Hogan controlled the business, which just showed that he didn't know what the fuck he was talking about. This is why I believe that Eric Bischoff's a fucking idiot.
Yeah, because at that point, 1990, like after the Sting thing, I was completely out on Hulk Hogan. I really started to like in 1998, early 1998. Because in 97, I loved WWF 97, but I think I was probably a bigger fan of WCW 97.
I was 100%.
And then, but 1998 with the rise of Austin. Even though they had lost Bret Hart, and I was like, I was so excited for Bret Hart to go to WCW, but with them screwing the 97 Starrcade finish and then completely fumbling Bret Hart's intro and completely fumbling the way that they were going to be booking Bret Hart, I had lost all confidence in WCW in early 1998. That doesn't mean I wasn't still watching it, but I became more of a fan of WWF in 1998 because they had The Rock and Stone Cold and Undertaker and Mankind and all these characters are starting to get hot and D-Generation X getting hot at the right time. And I saw this group of aging talents get misused and not want to do business and not show up for shows and doing all the crazy stuff that they were doing in 1998 in WCW. I was completely out after that.
No, I was same. For me, the emblematic problem in WCW, the moment I realized I was so deflated with the whole thing with Super Brawl and because that's my favorite story in wrestling is the Sting.
It's one of the great ever.
It's to this day, it's one of my favorite stories in wrestling. And like, I'll tell you when WCW truly broke my heart and when I was like sort of check out of the company is when Sting joins the NWO Wolfpack.
Yeah.
Watching Sting in that red and black, just to me, it felt like such a shit on the storytelling that they had spent at that point damn near 3 years on. The fact, and this wasn't like to me, it's like, remember when in New Japan when they tried to get Goto to join Chaos after years of feuding with Goto, and Goto is like, fuck you guys, fuck you guys, fuck you guys, fuck you guys. And eventually Goto joins Chaos, and there's like, and he's never quite been the same since. But I mean, like, it took Goto a long time to like be into, because I think Gato kind of saw that. When Sting just joins the Wolfpack, I was like, fuck, dude, like you spent years like standing up against this and being like the solo guy. And it's just like, for me, it was such a, like, for me, character guy, like, it just never made sense. It didn't work. He looked terrible. He looked like he had a giant sunburn with the red paint. I hated it so much.
I hated the red face paint. And NWO Wolfpack was kind of like a hip hop style group, you know, because they had, you know, because I thought Conan was great with the Wolfpack.
Yeah, he was great.
Conan and Hall and Nash and with the Wolfpack, I thought that was pretty good. But then they added Sting, and I was like, not only are you making Sting
and
look
Luger.
bad, I think you're dragging them down. And then Luger, I thought was the worst of them all, because he's wearing like Jinko jeans and like just like he's just so uncool. And they made him out like, and the thing about Luger was like, it was never that Luger was cool. It's just he was just awesome. Like that was the appeal to Lex Luger. And I think Luger is criminally underrated, to be honest with you. But by 1998, when he joins the Wolfpack, I thought he was toast at that point, even though 97 was a great year for him.
97, he's the second best babyface in professional wrestling behind Sting.
Yeah.
Like Luger in 97, like when he beats Hogan, right, for that, he has a very short reign with the WCW title. I think a lot of people forget about in 97.
A week.
The fans, it's a week, and just the Papa rating at the, you know, and it worked. But the fans went crazy. Luger's so over at that point. Like that's like the best Lex Luger there was 97 Luger. It's definitely the peak of his career. It's downhill from there. Like, I don't know, man. Like the whole Wolfpack thing, like again, they just always stuck too many people in those things. Like if they just kept it to like Conan, Nash, and Hall and 6, or he was gone by then actually. It was just Conan, Nash, and Hall. It'd have been fine. But I mean, like Sting should just been Sting. They should just, and it's funny too, because like this, the Wolfpack doesn't last very long. By the end of the year, Sting's back in the black and white. Just he's pretty much directionless till 99.
Yeah. We could go on about this forever, but we'll save the rest of it for episode 2. I'm curious to see. I think in episode 2, and I have not seen any of the previews. I think, you know, in episode 1 they really went over Eric Bischoff's part in a lot of things. Because if you remember, by the end of like in 1999, Bischoff gets fired. And I think they'll cover that in episode 2. And that Kevin Nash starts to gain more power in 98, 99. And I think that Kevin Nash, they're going to start to give him a lot of the blame in 1999 or in episode 2. And Shadow Man is one of those guys that thinks that Kevin Nash deserves a lot of blame. So we'll cover that on the next episode of Who Killed WCW. But that's going to do it for us this time on Overtime, our Overtime series, Who Killed WCW. Thank you guys for being here. And until next time, mahalo. Hey, now it's Overtime. I'm your host, Mike Gilbert, and I'm here with JD by God Oliva. How you doing, JD?
I love Sting, the original Sting theme song. It warms my cold, dead heart every time I hear it.
Yeah, man. Well, I'm excited to get into this topic. I do have to apologize to the Patreon audience. JD and I were not able to record on Sunday for 2 reasons. The first one being it was Father's Day. We just weren't able to do it because of Father's Day. But I know me specifically, I had a ton of homework, dude. I just could not do anything on Sunday. I was in my office from like 5 till like 10:30 at night on Sunday night doing homework.
Dude, I got 9 hours of grad school. I just finished one of my classes today. Pretty stoked about that. So I got 6 hours left of grad school for the summer. So I get it, man. Like being a grown up freaking sucks.
I know, man. And I'm really trying to push to graduate this year. I want to be done this year, and I want to be done with school forever this coming up year. So
I got the spring, and then the more school you take, the more you get paid. So like, I just want to get this master's, because then it's master's plus, and you keep racking up more money. We top out at master's plus 45. So the sooner I can get there, the better.
Yes. But hey, so what we're going to talk about right now, we're going to do episode 2 of Who Killed WCW. And then later this weekend, you guys are going to get episode 3 of Who Killed WCW. And well, it's funny you mentioned Eric Bischoff, because episode 2 was very much about rebuilding the Eric Bischoff brand and rebuilding his image, and him kind of passing the buck off onto Brad Siegel and all like AOL, Time Warner, and all those people for killing, and all the Turner execs for killing WCW, while taking a little bit of accountability. And here's the thing: when someone takes a little bit of accountability for something small that they did, and then points the fingers at all these other people, they're not actually taking accountability. They're trying to make you think that they're an honest person, that they're accountable for their actions, when in actuality they're still passing the buck. And that is what a coward does, and Eric Bischoff is the lying, grifting coward.
It's almost like we just had a conversation about Eric Bischoff being a gigantic grifter.
Yeah. We literally just got done talking about that. But Yeah, so the whole episode, and I thought this episode wasn't as good as the first one, but and it's because the bullshit detector just kind of started going off like crazy during this episode.
Yeah, I told you last week, or 2 weeks when we talked about this, that this show is going to be the Eric Bischoff Reclamation Project because he's cool with those guys, and now those guys are in the Conrad crew. They're scumbag grifters too. Husney and whatever his name, like whoever those guys are, the Dark Side guys. No, man, now they're might as well have an ad-free podcast because they're just like that. Like, I don't recall Brad Siegel telling Eric Bischoff to spend $100 million or whatever it was on Kiss.
Yeah, which I didn't really get a lot of coverage on this documentary.
Shockingly, you don't hear about all the amount of money Eric Bischoff wasted, or Megadeth, and I like Megadeth, but didn't need them on Nitro.
No, it didn't. It didn't really pop a rating. It didn't really sell any tickets. But here's the thing: is like what they didn't call Bischoff out on, and I wish they would have. But because Bischoff is a part of that clique now,
he's the producer.
They weren't going to. Bischoff very much like after a little bit, once they started rolling and getting famous, and all the money is rolling in, then it became like he is going to use WCW to get to do shit that he's always wanted to do. Right? Sturgis, South Dakota. Eric Bischoff very much into bike riding. Right? So what do? They have an outdoor show, which I thought Road Wild shows. I thought the visual was very cool. All that, but that was very much an excuse for him to ride his motorcycle and hang out with some bikers and be part of the biker crew. And then he uses Turner's money, not his money, Turner's money to spend $100 million or whatever it was on Kiss to bring in Megadeth and all the other bullshit. And then, and he's not being held accountable for that. The only thing that he's willing to take any type of accountability on is a couple of minor bad booking decisions, which has ultimately tanked the company, if you think about it.
No, 100%. Eric Bischoff, like you said, he got to do things he always wanted to do, and wrestling provided him those opportunities. Eric Bischoff always wanted to be a swing. Never mind. I'll leave that one. I don't want to get sued. It's really a shame because, like you said, like you have this great quote that I can never ever get right about success and failure and masters and whatnot. I can never.
I'm gonna say it one more time, but
I can never remember it. Please.
Success has 100 fathers, but failure is an orphan.
There you go. I've already forgotten it. Like it's so accurate. And he is the biggest example of it. And he'll sit there and tell you what a genius he was for the NWO when all he did was lift a common Japanese wrestling trope.
Yeah.
Right.
And you know what? He was smart to do it. By the way.
Nothing wrong with lifting tropes. It's fine. But he doesn't act like that's what he did.
Yeah.
Like he acts like he came up with the invader storyline. When let's be honest, the idea of a foreign invader invading your turf and ruining your home is very much something that the Japanese people had to deal with in a little thing called World War II.
Yes.
That's why it's so ingrained in pro wrestling, because it's a major part of their culture. Right? That's why we've had a ton of invader storylines. Going back to like Antonio Inoki, what did he do? He slew the foreign invader every single week. Ricky Dozan, I'm going to beat the American, right? That's what they do. And all they did in the 80s, right? When they started this stuff, the UWF invasions, it was the same thing. Oh, the outsiders are coming in to take our stuff. And because that's the Japanese story, is you get beat up and then you rise up again, right? That's what they did. The problem was Eric Bischoff screwed up and forgot to do the rise up again part. They just had the NWO trample WCW. And then he forgot to I've devalued my company completely and told my fan base that my company sucks.
Yeah. He told NWO told everybody that WCW sucked. Mm-hmm. and the WCW was uncool and they were the cool heels. And then so what does Bischoff do? He aligns himself with the NWO. And he was like, yes, I was with WCW, but I left them because they suck and they're uncool. And you guys shouldn't like them either. And then ultimately, people realize like Kevin Nash and Scott Hall, they are pretty fucking cool. Like I do want to hang out with those guys. You know what I mean? Like X-Pac or Six, like he is super cool, right? Mm-hmm. And so like the fan base turned against WCW. Is almost like they should have renamed the whole company NWO after a while because everybody hated WCW at that point.
They tried that for a while. They tried to rebrand the company as WCW NWO, and no, it didn't work. No. But I mean, that was the whole thing. Is Eric Bischoff's genius idea was to destroy WCW. Well, mission accomplished.
Yeah. Yeah.
You incompetent idiot.
Yeah, and you know what? Like, so we talked about last week how 97 really we started to see the cracks in the foundation with Starrcade 97, right? And then early on in 1998 is when Thunder comes on, whenever the creation of Thunder in the episode. I felt like they did do a good job of explaining how when the Thunder not only watered down Nitro, watered down the overall product, but really Eric Bischoff was saying that they didn't give us any extra money for Thunder, and we didn't have the infrastructure in place to be able to do 2 primetime shows. So they asked us to do more, but did not give us more to be able to help with that. And I think that's right. That sucks. That is a fair point. But the first crack in the foundation was Starrcade 97. And I think that the next major crack in the foundation was the creation of Thunder, honestly.
Mm-hmm. But the problem is they were never creative enough to work around it.
Yeah.
And I get that. But at the same time, you didn't have to fly 1 million people into every Nitro. You could have booked it smarter so that you weren't spending that kind of money. The problem with Eric is that he willingly spent Turner's money because it wasn't his money, but he never thought about how to be smart with it because he just assumed that the faucet would stay out, would run forever. He never thought about how to be smart with his money. And that's the problem, is that he doesn't like saying, I wasted a lot of Turner money and made my bosses really mad. Yeah. You could have booked Thunder smarter. The original idea was to have split crews. They didn't do it. And I hate hearing this because I heard it with Collision too. When you launch another product, it waters down the product. It makes it not as good. That didn't happen when SmackDown started.
No, well,
nobody ever said SmackDown watered down Raw. And remember, we didn't get split crews for 2 years into the run of SmackDown. Mm-hmm. The first 2 years, and again, those are major success years in the WWF.
Well, we really didn't get it until WWF bought WCW.
Uh-huh.
That's when we really got it. Well, because then they had the talent, and then they had the infrastructure in place to have 2 separate writing crews. But the creation of SmackDown very much led Vince Russo to go to WCW because they wanted him to write a second show but not pay him more.
But that's the same thing Bischoff bitched about.
Yeah, same thing.
Vince figured it out.
Yeah.
I mean, say what you want about the rapist. He is a smart businessman.
Well, yeah, he's a smart businessman, and he can lead people to do things, and he can get people to perform at a high level and all those things. And that's what. Look, I don't get me started on Vince McMahon and his dark side, but he is a good leader, right? I don't want to compliment the guy, but as far as leadership skills, he can get talent and he can get people to work hard for him. And that is the mark of a good leader. That doesn't mean he is a moral human being, because he is not. He's a contemptible human being.
He's very good at manipulating people into doing what he wants them to do.
Yes, in more ways than one, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But that is another thing about Eric Bischoff. He did not have the leadership skills.
He is not.
No, he is not. He very much, and I think the people were calling him out on this a little bit, that he wanted to be a part of the show. He wanted to be one of the boys. He wanted to be part of the crew. He didn't want to be a boss. He didn't want to be a leader. Right. And that was, and maybe it seemed like now, like looking back on it, he's probably thinking like, well, I wasn't technically the leader of the company. That was the Turner executives. But no, it's like, you were the guy in charge. You were the executive producer running the day-to-day operations. Everybody came to you. Like you had to lead this company into greatness, and you failed.
He had no problem. You watch those shows. You watch when he showed up and other things. He had no problem telling everybody he was the boss of WCW, and the only person he answered to was Ted Turner.
Yeah. Yes. 100%. Now Harvey Schiller and some of these other people, they were higher up on the food chain than he was. So he technically did, but he could legitimately go right to Ted with his ideas, and he can get them approved.
But he said that all the time.
He did.
Like, he said it. And then now, but when it feels like, well, I really wasn't in charge. Like, I get so tired. Like, he blames the Turner people. He blames standards and practices, those things were all there when he was successful.
Yes. And here's the thing that episode 2 tried to paint. They continued to try to paint this picture that WCW executives hated WCW, which they did early on.
They did.
They legitimately did. Not everybody, but they legitimately did early on. But when they got hot, they all wanted to be a part of it. They wanted it to succeed. They were showing up to the events. You had Brad Siegler doing panels talking about the greatness of WCW and how many tickets they had sold, and him like legitimately like, hey, we got Goldberg, we have this major star, and I think that was the next focus, and we'll talk about him in a little bit. But like him going out in public and bragging on the fact that they got this next big star that is going to be good for kids and things like that. They didn't hate WCW until they started to lose money by the tens of millions of dollars at a time, losing money. That's the only reason why they hated it.
Dennis Green. They had Dennis Green syndrome. They were who we thought they were. Like they thought they were stupid. Then they were like, oh, maybe this isn't stupid. Nope, they're stupid. God damn it, we knew this. Like that's exactly what it was.
But when they were losing money, they no longer liked it anymore, and they didn't love pro wrestling, so they were not going to go out of the way to try to save this company. They were fine getting rid of it, absolutely. But when they were hot, everybody was on board. Everybody was on board. And they have evidence to prove that. One of the things that Eric tried to paint also was that he was part of them losing money was Turner essentially taking some of their revenue and moving it over into other opportunities. They did do that, and that there is evidence of that. But that's also part of being part of a unit, right? Like Turner's this big conglomerate, this big umbrella, and they can pull funds from any other pocket of money and put it into other pockets of money. In fact, I know that because, guys, I want to tell you, I'm now a corporate finance expert. I got a 96 on my midterm this week, so I feel like I'm capable of speaking on this. I go to Columbia Southern University, which is the Harvard of internet school. But like, you know, when you're a human resource manager, right, and you're in charge of the budget, you have this big budget and you have these little bags of money everywhere, and then if one side is kind of uneven or whatever, you can pull from the other to help the other one out. That's how that works. If they were a singular company, it wouldn't have been that way, but they were part of a bigger unit.
And because WCW had been such a money loser for its existence, all but 18 months of its entire existence, it was very easy to Turner to go, yeah, well, they always lose money, so just pass it on to this.
Yeah. That wasn't a big deal, but I think the biggest thing about episode 2 and the biggest failure, one of the biggest failures of WCW was the fumbling of Goldberg. And we saw this, like, I'm not comparing, I am comparing Joe Hendry to Goldberg. Smaller scale, obviously, right? TNA works in front of bars. Goldberg's selling out the Georgia Dome, the big difference, right? But they had a guy and they went with him, and then there were other forces at play working behind the scenes to try to manipulate it and make sure that he failed. And that's exactly what happened to Goldberg, because he was 100% their biggest star.
I'm sorry, I have to tweet that you just compared Joe Hendry to Bill Goldberg as a way to get people to buy into our Patreon so they can hear the madness that you've just spouted. But continue. Hold on. Give me a second.
But I think it's kind of maybe a parable or something like that. But I'm just talking about like how the build, they got this guy on the rise and now they're actively sabotaging their own guy. And that's what they ultimately did to Goldberg, right? It took them a lot longer. They didn't do it on night one like they did to Joe Hendry. Like TNA did to Joe Hendry, but they have this organic star that they have created, and they decided to go ahead and fuck the thing up and blow the whole deal. Goldberg was such a phenomenon. And I know that he couldn't work in the ring, and he, didn't do all the moves that some of the other guys did, and he wasn't very fluid. He was very green. But guess what else he was? He was money. He had more charisma than anybody else in that freaking company. I'm telling, dude, like he had like that physical charisma. Mm-hmm. Like he very much, out of anybody in that company, he was like the one guy that you thought could actually kick somebody's ass.
That's
you know
true.
What I mean? Like he was just super intense, and the screaming and all the mannerisms that he did. He didn't cut good promos, but he didn't have to. He was such a big star without the promos.
I agree with that. And he was one of they're saying, well, Eric Bischoff couldn't make a star. That's bullshit. They made Goldberg.
They did.
I mean, like Goldberg was nothing. In September 97, when he debuts and beats Hugh Morris, I remember watching it going, wow, that guy just won. Everybody did that. And within 3 months, he was over, right? Like the rise of Goldberg in 1998 is one of pro wrestling's great stories. And like I've always found it interesting that people were like, the moment he lost, it was over for him. And I find that to be interesting because if you can't ever lose, then there's like no real stakes to anything. Right. I think he had to lose. I think the circumstances of what happened were the problem. Like the fact that he lost to Kevin Nash for no, like, and then it was the story surrounding it that made it just awful.
Well, he lost to Kevin Nash, and they ended another Starrcade, 2 Starrcades in a row with a fuck finish, right? Which Starrcade's their biggest show of the year, and of course they decided to blow the main event again. But not only that, you go back in 3. So 96
Piper wins. Hogan beats Piper, or Piper beats Hogan, but we don't know it's a non-title match until after.
That is true. I remember Hogan beating Piper, Piper beating Hogan, but I thought that he won the championship, and they didn't explain it until afterwards that it was a non-title match.
We didn't know it was a non-title. They didn't make a big deal about it being a non-title match until it was over. And we were all like, what the fuck? So 3 years in a row.
Yeah.
I forget. I cannot remember what happened in Starrcade 99, like for the life of me, and I don't want to.
Starrcade 99 was I think it was that Brett and Goldberg or no? I don't remember Starrcade 99.
That was Starrcade 99.
And that was Goldberg concussing Brett, wasn't it?
Yeah, Brett, the end of Bret Hart's career. I don't remember what the finish was of that match, though.
Yeah.
All anybody remembers of that. All I remember, that was Vince Russo's NWO.
Yeah.
And
which we'll get into Russo on episode 3, but yeah. So again, like they gave everybody another screw job finish at the end of a Starrcade, at the end of the biggest pay-per-view of the year. But if you go back and you look at his title run, so this is how hot WCW was. They sold out the Georgia Dome with 40,000 people even before they announced Hogan and Goldberg was going to be for the world title in the main event. Like they had announced like locally they would be wrestling, but they didn't announce it until the Thursday Thunder before JJ Dillon comes out and makes that big announcement. I remember going crazy when I saw that. I was so excited. I was such a big Goldberg fan. And then they go and they do that and he wins the title and he's like this big mega star. And then they go into Bash at the Beach the next month. And guess who he wrestles at Bash at the Beach?
Oh, who did he defend the title against at his first paper? I'm trying to remember. It's like a nobody.
It was Kurt Hennig.
That's right.
Kurt Hennig's one of the greatest ever, but he wasn't a big star at that point. He was past his prime. Not a headline act, right? Hogan, and it was like Hogan and Rodman were the main event, right?
Hogan and
it was Hogan and Rodman versus DDP and Malone.
Yeah, that was Bash at the Beach. Yeah, because Hogan and Leno was the main event at Road Wild.
Right. So then you go into August in Road Wild 98. Yeah. Hogan's still in the main event against Jay Leno, and Bill Goldberg's defending the world title in a battle royal. Yeah. And then you get into September, right? Goldberg's not even on the show.
The world champion.
Yeah.
the main event is the War Games.
Yes, with Ultimate Warrior like kind of fumbling around and barely able to move, setting up the big match with Hogan. You go to Halloween Havoc 98, Goldberg's best match of his career against Diamond Dallas Page.
That was the main event.
That was the main event, and I loved it.
Draw though, but it wasn't the draw. Yeah. They didn't
Hogan and Warrior.
Yeah. One of the worst professional wrestling matches between two stars in history.
And then you go to November, War Games 3. World War III. Sorry, World War III. Goldberg's not even on that show. So there is no defending how they did Goldberg, and it was very clear. And I think Conan was saying, I felt like Conan is pretty honest in these shows. Conan was like, there was just so much jealousy. Nobody wanted to wrestle the guy. They wanted to lose to him. Mm-hmm. So everybody was trying to avoid him. And I'm just like, no, like he should have victories over Lex Luger, Randy Savage, the Chris Jericho match we all wanted. We ended up not getting it. Like that was supposed to be at War Games. We ended up not doing it.
The only guy that wanted to work with him was Chris Jericho, and they wouldn't do it.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, well, because Nash got in Goldberg's head. We're always pointing the finger at Eric Bischoff for killing WCW. I feel like a small pinky needs to be pointed at Kevin Nash.
Kevin Nash never should have had that much power to begin with.
No.
But Eric Bischoff allowed it.
Yes.
That's the problem. It goes back to Bischoff. All Bischoff had, because Vince would never have allowed it. Like when there were problems with the Clique, Vince bowed to them too. But I mean, like they all eventually left, and eventually Vince put everyone that wasn't named Shawn Michaels in their place eventually.
Yeah. I think that Kevin Nash's booking was atrocious. And of course, as soon as he gets the book, he books himself against Goldberg. And then of course they beat him. Look, I'm not saying Goldberg should have stayed undefeated forever, but he didn't beat anybody. Like he beat Hogan. They should have done the Hogan rematch at some point. They never did that.
Starcade.
Yes,
That would have been a draw match.
Yeah, they should have built it to Starcade. But they didn't do it because Hogan didn't want to lose to him again. He's like, I put him over once, and that's all I'm going to do. And then I'm going to still keep myself on top, despite the fact that I'm not the world heavyweight champion. We're going to give him the belt. Everybody's going to think that I'm this good guy. But what I'm really going to do is upstage him the entire time.
We should, as a fun experiment, sometime we should call Muse about this and ask. We should rebook 1998, late 1998 WCW. What do you do with Bill Goldberg? He's the champion. How do you? Let's say I got a crazy idea. Let's say we want to make money with Bill Goldberg as the champion.
Yes.
How do you do that?
Well, I literally, like I just said, here's the problem.
Yeah.
I think they wanted to do some of the things that we would want to do, but they couldn't get anybody to do it because they didn't have the leadership skills to be able to get those guys to be put in those positions. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Because Eric Bischoff was a failure as a leader. He just couldn't get guys to do what he wanted to do.
He had no problem throwing coffee in Eddie Guerrero. Like, if you were beneath him, Eric Bischoff had no problem leading. Like, he's a complete. I'm gonna say it, he's pussy. Like, that's a derogatory term, but I got nothing better to say about that guy. Like, he let people bully him. He let people just run roughshod over him. He's a complete and total sis. Like, he's a wuss. Like, I have never had less respect for someone as a leader than Eric Bischoff. Like, I would love to just say, if you had a chance to book 1998 WCW with Bill Goldberg, I probably shouldn't use that phrase, but I can't think of a better one. Like, I don't know what else. I'd love to hear what, like, you could do if you had the idea of actually building Bill Goldberg into something special. And then you also had Bret Hart just sitting there.
Yeah.
Just sitting there. Biggest star in wrestling the year before.
Yeah. They totally blew it with Bret. They blew it with Sting, you know? And it's like, one guy after another, they just continued to blow it with. And it was like, they had almost like they had so much good talent, and yet they still figured out a way to mess it up. They were on fire. They had 18 months of growth and profitability, like monster profits. Look, the Georgia Dome did over $900,000 gate. Today, that's probably like close to $2 million. You know what I mean? Like that's a huge gate. And then at the end of 1998, they did the TWA Dome, which actually broke the record in the Georgia Dome. They didn't have as many people, but they had a bigger gate. And then 2 weeks after that, they go back to the Georgia Dome for the Finger Poke of Doom show, and that had over 35,000 people, and that actually broke the all-time record for their gate for WCW. They were on, and it's like, and then later that year, Bischoff gets fired, which is what we will get into on the next episode. But I think that, you know, this episode exposed Eric Bischoff as being an even bigger grifter and a liar than we already knew. It exposed Kevin Nash as to not knowing how to book a promotion, because Kevin Nash was like, you know, there's no money in a babyface champion. The money's in the chase. And with certain babyfaces, that is true. I think that's true for some babyfaces, but not monster babyfaces, not big, strong, and powerful babyfaces. I think Goldberg should have been Bruno. He should have been Hogan. He should have been one of those guys.
Mike, I have a question for you. What was Kevin Nash in WWE?
The worst drawing champion of all time.
He was, but he was a monster babyface champion.
He was. Makes you think, right? Yeah. He very much just wanted to get rid of Goldberg because he wanted Goldberg's spot. And he wanted Goldberg out of the way because they didn't feel like he earned it. But guess what? Look, they say Goldberg's not a great wrestler. Well, you know what? A lot of guys weren't great wrestlers. Neither was Kevin Nash. But you know what? He could draw.
You know what's weird? Because they're the same. Kevin Nash shows up in WWF in May of 93, and he's Shawn Michaels' bodyguard. And in early 94, he gets the rocket strap. And by the end of 94, he's the freaking champion. There's not a lot of difference. There's not a lot of difference between Kevin Nash, Diesel, and Goldberg, right?
And why
their pushes are remarkably similar.
They are. Goldberg got his quicker, but very much similar. And you know what? Like, a lot of people had to be put into positions to be able to get Kevin Nash over too. He beat Bob Backlund in like 30 seconds in Madison Square Garden. You know what I mean? It's like, and
he
then
he laid waste to everybody that year.
Yeah,
he was the it's very similar. He has the Intercontinental title that year. He has the tag titles with Shawn Michaels that year. Like Kevin Nash won everything in 1994. So for him to say these things about Goldberg, and then he has a year-long run in WWE as a babyface monster champion. What a fucking hypocrite.
Yeah. I don't know. I think I don't think that he gets enough shit for how much damage he did to WCW when he was in charge. And really he should get more. But hey guys, we're gonna go ahead and cut it off right here. That was enough talk of WCW. Who Killed WCW episode 3. Stay tuned this weekend, and JD and I will release Who Killed WCW episode 3, which is all about bro. That scumbag, that grifter, he's back in our lives. Coming up next on Who Killed WCW episode 3. And until next time, mahalo. It's overtime with Mike and JD, and I'm your host, Mike Gilbert, and I'm here with JD Oliva. What's up, JD?
Nothing. We've been talking for the last 2 hours.
yeah. We're getting. If you guys are noticed that if you're watching this on the YouTube version on Patreon, and you notice that JD and I are wearing the same exact outfits that we're for our last 2 podcasts. Well, it's not because we don't change our clothes. It's just because we missed on Sunday. We were supposed to record this last Sunday, episode 2, but we just couldn't do it because of all the different things we had going on. So, but here we are. We're pulling a late one. We're doing a lot, doing our 3rd podcast in a row. But man, we're going to talk about episode 3 of Who Killed WCW, and this was the Vince Russo show. I felt like this was like episode 2 was kind of them trying to do the reclamation project for Eric Bischoff. I felt episode 3 was very much like Vince Russo trying to, poorly like sell his case poorly, and everybody calling bullshit on him the entire episode. I loved it. I thought it was good.
Here's the thing. We can get mad about Bischoff being a grifter and not very talented, but he's way smoother than Vince Russo. Russo is one of the least likable human beings in the world. And every time he tries to blame somebody else, everybody goes, this guy's full of shit, man. Like Bischoff can snow you. Russo is just so like smarmy.
Well, that's the thing is like, at least Bischoff had a little bit of success, and Bischoff had some good ideas when he had total control of the company. Vince Russo never did. Like the moment he came into charge, he never had any good. Now he might've had some good ideas when he was working under Vince McMahon, but those were filtered ideas. Vince McMahon would kill probably 99 of his ideas, and then he'd get number 100 through, and they would go with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he got beaver cleavage through, man. I'm zero convinced that Vince Russo has any talent whatsoever.
Oh man, dude, I can't go back and watch that Attitude Era stuff. It's so bad.
It's bad. It's awful. Anything that doesn't involve Steve Austin, The Rock, or Mick Foley is absolute trash.
Yeah.
It's so bad. And a lot of the stuff involving those guys is bad too.
It legitimately doesn't hold up. You know what I mean? Some of the moments are still really cool. I like seeing some of the like 90s WWE clips and stuff like that people put out there. Like the moments are good, but then you go back like, hey, maybe I should watch that episode of Raw.
Awful.
And then you go back and watch it. It's like, I'm a 41-year-old man. What am I doing? Like you got Goldust and Luna Vachon and ball gags wrestling.
Vince Russo's a genius. He'll tell you so. Like WWF in 1988 absolutely sucks. Anything, and here's like WWF outside the main events was not good until the Radicals come over in 2000.
Yeah.
Like, and coincidentally, Vince Russo's gone, and you've got, I forget the name of the guy who was booking after him, but he was much better. And then Stephanie takes over, and it's fine. It's not as good as it was when I can't remember his name. I'm drawing a blank.
Who did take over, because he left and he took Ed Ferrara with him, but it wasn't Brian Gortz, because
no, it wasn't Gortz yet. He was
on the team, but he wasn't in charge.
There was a guy between them who I know. I can hear Bix and Chris yelling at me right now from the ether. I can't think of his name. It's 12:30 at night here in Illinois, and I'm drawing a blank. But I mean, so those shows are not good until 2000. Right? They're not good television. It just isn't. Like I listened to Between the Sheets, speaking of Chris and Bix, like when they do the late 90s stuff, it's like painful to listen. Like the WCW TV show was much better before that. Like, and then Russo comes over, and then the show is completely unwatchable. I will say this. There's one good thing to come out of the Russo era. Do you know what
Let's
that
hear it.
is? Sting switched to Seek and Destroy as the theme song.
Yeah, you know what? And for my money, I know our theme song here is the
It's
original
great.
Sting,
Mhm.
but Seek and Destroy is my favorite Sting theme song. And when he
I do.
when he came out in his final match, he came out to Seek and Destroy, and I was like, "Thank you, Tony Khan.
Yeah.
God love you." And he did that at Wembley last year too. Yeah.
Tony knows when to write that check. Like every now and then we get the final countdown, and it's like Tony knows when to make that count. And I appreciate that about Tony as a wrestling fan, that he's not afraid to write a check when we need an emotional moment. But yeah, Sting switches to Seek and Destroy, has a nonsensical heel run for a little bit that doesn't go anywhere.
No.
And it's just, God, what a fucking nightmare of a show this was.
Yeah. So episode 2, they leave with Eric Bischoff riding off into the sunset, heading to the mountains of Wyoming or back to his ranch or whatever. He's going fishing, folks, because Harvey Schiller has fired his ass. Not because WCW executives were out to get him and that they wanted to kill WCW. They fired him because WCW was losing shitloads of money.
He wrote a giant check to Kiss for no reason.
Yes. Yeah. So that's why he got fired. And in this episode, Vince Russo comes out. Vince Russo has said he wants to leave WWF because WWF has added SmackDown, a second show, because they want to compete with Thunder. And they said, "Hey, we want you to write this show, but we're not going to pay you any extra money for it." And I'm on Vince Russo's side. He said, "Go piss up a rope," and he says, "I'm leaving." And then he was able to finagle his way over into WCW and get a fucking big time paying gig as the head of creative over there. Vince Russo also in this episode claims that he had a hand in Eric Bischoff getting fired. And Vince, I'd love to give you credit for that, but Eric Bischoff is the one that gets all the credit for that one. You had nothing to do with that, buddy.
Boy, Vince Russo, I mean, he'll tell you he was something to do with everything. Like, he is convinced he was actually in the control room when the Apollo 11 landed on the moon. He'll tell you that he was the second gunman on the grassy knoll. Like, he'll tell you about that. Like, he loves just to take credit for shit. Like, success has how many fathers, Mike?
100.
Vince Russo.
Yeah, Vince Russo is the daddy of most success.
That's one.
And has never had a bad idea. And that was the thing on this episode. It was one bad idea being presented after another, and then him trying to justify it. Just crappy idea after crappy idea after crappy idea. So the guy comes in, and then he didn't immediately put himself on TV, but his face wasn't being shown, but he automatically became a character on the show pretty quickly when he was doing the creative control gimmick. I think wasn't it with the Harris brothers?
The Harris brothers and the powers that be. He's basically Dr. Claw for my 80s fans. He's basically doing Dr. Claw from Inspector Gadget. Yeah.
So he was on the show very quickly. They did that whole horrendous tournament that they were doing because they got they held the titles up. I think they held the title up after I think Goldberg and Sid main evented Halloween Havoc 99. I just remember liking that match because it was bloody. I can't really remember. And then they did this big tournament that was going to end in Toronto and with Bret Hart versus Chris Benoit, which was I found to be a really good match. But
that is a good match actually.
Yeah, but then after that it was like all downhill. He ends up getting shit canned like a month or two later
because he was bad at his job.
Yeah, well he was saying that the ratings went up. They really didn't.
They didn't go up. He says that.
They had. I'm sure they had some peaks, but the show was so trashy. They couldn't sell commercial time, and that's what Brad Siegel was saying. It's like, yeah, maybe the ratings went up a little bit, but we couldn't sell ads because it was so trashy.
He cut the show in a third. They took the show from 3 hours and they cut it in half. And he said, "Look, the ratings went up," and it's like, yeah, because you went unopposed and it didn't go up. You made them less money.
Yes,
because you had less time.
All he cared about was the ratings points, right? Guess what the TV execs care about? Ad revenue. And even if the ratings did go up a little bit, they got less money for it. So it didn't fucking matter. And then on top of that, they quit selling pay-per-views.
And tickets.
Yeah.
Ticket sales went down. Pay-per-view revenue went down. He's like, well, I was the TV writer, bro. I just want it. No, you were not just the TV writer. Your job is to direct the show. You didn't do a good job directing the show. You made it worse. You made less people watch.
Yeah.
Dork.
Yeah, people quit coming to the arenas. He thinks his only job was to get ratings, but no, your job is to ratings are important. Ad revenue is more important. ticket sales are important and pay-per-view sales are important. All of them are important. You can't forego the other stuff to focus on this one metric. All the metrics are important, right? Merchandise sales are important. Video game sales are important. He was foregoing all that other stuff because all he cared about was getting buzz, attention, and ratings points.
But they didn't go up. Like, that's the whole thing.
Yeah.
It's like, he says that. It's like, I'm going to tell people I'm 6'3". Like, I'm 5'9", but I'm going to keep telling people I'm 6'3". And if I just keep saying it, eventually someone's going to actually see me and go, well, of course JD's 6'3". He says it all the time.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah. And so I've one of the things that Meltzer wrote in the Observer last week, which I thought was pretty profound. He said, people are pointing the finger at Vince Russo for killing WCW, and he did not. He just was unable to save it. He was brought in to save the company because he had sold himself as being the genius behind the WWF boom when he really wasn't. He was like an offensive coordinator calling some plays, and then the head coach made the ultimate calls, which was Vince McMahon.
He's a Patriots offensive coordinator. How many Patriots OCs got head coaching jobs and didn't do jack shit?
Literally all of them, like Bill O'Brien, Josh McDaniels, Charlie Weiss. Like I think there might Matt Patricia.
Yep.
Yeah, I think there might be a couple more, but in their defensive coordinators, none of them have done anything either. Like it was all, it was Belichick and Brady.
Tom Brady.
With the Attitude Era, it was Vince, it was Stone Cold, and it was The Rock. That's who got the Attitude Era over.
It's amazing how successful you can be when you're working with Hall of Fame level talent.
Yeah. And I guarantee you, Stone Cold and The Rock called bullshit on a lot of Vince Russo's ideas. Because if you don't think they also had some type of creative control, not total, but they had some type. If you said something to Stone Cold and he didn't want to do it, he'd tell you to go eat shit. And same with The Rock, right?
Very, very famously, Steve Austin, if he didn't like what you told him to do, he told you to eat shit.
Yeah. So you had to bring good ideas. But when Vince Russo comes over to WCW, he's got autonomy. And nobody can say no. And the people that could say no, like the veterans, were kind of ostracized and kind of pushed out. Those guys that would want to say no, which, led us to the stuff that happened in 2000. So anyway, by the beginning of 2000, he's gone. And then Kevin Sullivan comes back and takes over as the booker. And Kevin Sullivan had a little bit of success a couple years prior to that, but a lot of that had to do with the NWO and all that stuff.
He was the booker of the NWO. So, I mean, that's the thing. We talk about this, success having 100 fathers. Yeah, I got it. Like, you could give Kevin Sullivan is the guy that actually put those shows together. Kevin Sullivan is responsible for the rise in tickets, for the rise in the house show business, which happened before the NWO. That was the Ric Flair, Randy Savage feud in the spring of 96.
You know what? That is a very underrated feud, by the way. And I think more people should talk about that. I thought that feud was great.
It's the better feud. Like, it's way better. They had a long, like Savage and Flair have a long feud in WWF in 92. Yeah. And it's pretty solid. It's not for the time. It's fine. Their 96 feud was way better because it was about how much of a broken man Savage was. Like, Flair literally does take Liz from him.
Yes.
Like, and how he's left with nothing. And like, it reignited WCW's house show business because nobody else is working house shows except for your workhorses, your quality, guys, Savage and Flair. Those guys went around the horn, and that was what got WCW. No one talks about this because it's cute to say Eric Bischoff and it's cute to say the NWO and Hall and Nash. What turned around their business, and this is true, what turned around WCW's ticket selling business was Flair and Savage, booked by Kevin Sullivan. And Kevin Sullivan's not a great guy either, by any stretch of the imagination, but he deserves some credit for turning around the business as well. If we're going to give it to Eric Bischoff, we got to give it to Kevin Sullivan too.
Yeah, he was very much a part of it. And then, so anyway, he gets the book back in 2000 after Vince Russo gets sent home. And immediately he gets the book back, and Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, Dean Malenko, Perry Saturn. And what people don't remember is Shane Douglas and Conan also were part of that group. They quit, but they didn't get jobs at WWE, so they went right back. But they all immediately quit, even though Chris Benoit was the champion. And like Bill Bush was just like, yeah, we'll just let them out of their contracts. And they immediately go over to WWF.
Oh,
and I think
that's not the story, Mike.
Tell the story.
The story. Okay, so
the knife. Sorry.
Yeah. So Kevin Sullivan gets the booking job at WCW. And he had a lot of problems with the Benoit crew. And at the time, we were under the impression as fans that it was because none of the mid-carders got pushed. In reality, the story was that Benoit, and this is hard to talk about now, but Benoit took his wife, right?
Yeah.
Kevin Sullivan booked his divorce, but Kevin Sullivan was also abusive. He abused Nancy Sullivan. Like Nancy, the sad thing is Nancy actually went to Chris to end the cycle of abuse. And knowing what we know now happened is it makes it even more tragic. But a lot of that was like they were rallying behind their friend in Chris Benoit, who it's so hard to talk about this, but you have to look at this in 2000 eyes, not 2007 eyes. Like Chris Benoit saved Nancy from an abusive relationship. God, that's so weird to say, but that's what happened. So all of his friends were like, and again, they weren't getting pushed either. But I mean, like, this was a big source of conflict. So Kevin Sullivan, in his mind, is offering an olive branch to keep these guys happy. Is he puts, quote unquote, his worst enemy over as the champion in their first night. And these guys are like, fuck you. We're out of here. And then Mike Graham, the late Mike Graham, threatens to kill them all for leaving.
Yeah,
if I had a knife, I would
pull the shank, right?
I don't know if he actually pulled one, I don't know if he pulled a knife or if he just threatened them and said, I got a gun. It was something to that effect, but he threatened them and they went to they didn't take Mike Graham seriously, but they went to Turner HR and said, Mike Graham threatened to murder us. So then Bill Bush said, well, if you don't sue WCW, we'll just let you guys out of your contracts.
Yeah.
And they let all of them out. And then Vince said, Dean Douglas, no, we have bad blood with him. Conan, I spent a lot of money on that Max Moon suit, and he left. So we don't want those guys.
Yeah, but we'll take a flyer on these guys, and I think they had an eye on Benoit anyway, because Benoit really was becoming a top star.
Do you remember '95? Chris Benoit almost signed with WWF. He had tryout matches with. You remember who his manager was when his tryout matches?
His manager, what was it? Scotty Flamingo.
Ted DiBiase.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay, because his tryout matches never really made air, did they?
They never made air. He just did dark matches. They were testing him out, and they were going to program him with Ted DiBiase. I have a hunch. I cannot prove this, but I have a hunch that if Chris Benoit signs in the fall of '95, he is the ringmaster.
You know what? I think I've heard that story before, because Steve Austin doesn't come until like later in '95,
'96.
Well, he started in early '96, but he was signed by like the end of. He was 95.
Signed, yeah, but he's not on TV.
He debuted, I think, in like the Royal Rumble in '96 or something like that. Yeah, so, something like around that time. But
like around that time.
Yeah, I do remember him having a tryout because he was in ECW. He had been in WCW previous. He'd been in the light heavyweight tournament and done plenty of stuff with WCW and the
tag team with Bobby Eaton.
Yeah, in like 92, 93, but then he goes to Japan, and then he went to ECW for a while, and he started to make a name for himself in Japan and ECW. And of course, Bischoff loved bringing in the guys from Japan and Mexico and ECW, so that was a perfect fit. But yeah, so
when Tony does it, it's bad, according to Bischoff.
Yeah, like, oh, they don't have enough vignettes. Shut up, Eric, idiot. But so yeah, they immediately quit. They go over to WWF, and at that point, like, WCW was already dying, but at that point, it's just like
it's over.
It's time to take this company out into behind the barn, because they lost a significant part of their culture, right? Their entire mid card, their world champion, quit the company, and they go over to the WWF, and then like they go over the next week, and WWF breaks a ratings record. It was 8.1 in the main event, and then of course, Triple H already gets his victories over all those guys as soon as they come over.
God damn it, Mike! Fuck, I hate that guy.
Immediately comes over and Triple H starts beating him.
A few months later, he beat Taz when he was the ECW champion too.
Yeah,
like God, I hate that guy so much.
Yeah. So funny. So anyway, Sullivan's takes over, and it's the show. Even though I felt like as a viewer, I enjoyed it better than the Russo stuff, but like it continued to tank. I think they put Flair and Dusty back on top, and like Terry Funk's in there and all that. So it starts to go even more downhill, and then they do like this big great reset where they think they're going to hire, or they end up hiring Bischoff and Russo to come back as a tandem. And it was just a disaster from day one.
I went to the first pay-per-view. It was in Chicago with the Russo Bischoff era.
The New Blood Rising.
The New Blood Rising pay-per-view was in Chicago. They had the tournaments because they vacated every belt because Vince Russo's an idiot, and like they had to refill them all. I remember my brother Matt and I went. It was so awful.
Yeah,
I do remember he bought this Vampiro T-shirt at the pay-per-view that he wore for maybe the next 9 years, to the point where it was so ratty and disgusting. But he wore it, I swear to God, 3 times a week. It became like a running gag between friends and family with Matt's disgusting Vampiro shirt.
The Vampiro was like one of those guys that I thought I really liked from that era. I was a Vampiro fan.
Me too. Who wasn't? He was cool back then.
Yeah.
Like
in
2000, cool. They had the crew with Vampiro and the Great Muta.
The Misfits.
Yeah.
Jerry Only.
The Misfits. Yeah. Jerry Only from the actual Misfits.
Yeah.
Yeah. What a weird time in WCW.
Yeah. Yeah. Like Jerry Only was wrestling, and you had the Insane Clown Posse wrestling and all that stuff.
And the Great Muta. And it's just so weird.
Yeah. And you had, Sting and Vampiro feuding, and they did like this nail in the coffin match, and they were doing the blood stuff. They had the Millionaires Club versus the New Blood Rising. They covered that on the episode. And that I just like I get the premise and I get the idea, but boy, did they execute it poorly.
They booked it backwards.
Yeah.
It's so stupid. Like, it was so bad. Like, Hogan's like, I'm going to work a program with Billy Kidman, brother. And then Billy Kidman got a lot out of working with Hulk Hogan. Like, that was some of the worst TV ever. Good God.
And then, of course, I think we've talked about Bash to the Beach 2000 like a couple of times already, so we're not going to rehash that one. That's probably its own episode. But the whole thing with Bash to the Beach 2000 happens, and then that's basically where like there were irreconcilable differences between Bischoff and Russo. Like, there's just no turning back at that point.
Well, Russo was mean to Hogan, and
Yeah.
Bischoff's not gonna have that. You can't be mean to Hogan and expect Eric Bischoff to like you.
Have you ever seen like a story where you just hate all the characters? Like, that's Bash to the Beach 2000 with Hogan, Bischoff, and Russo. It's like, how can all of you guys be wrong all at the same time? They were only worried about their own bullshit. They were not worried about the people that paid money to see them.
I just want a plane to land in the middle of the arena and just take all 3 of those guys out. Everyone else is going to be safe. Just land on Bischoff's office during that argument, and just, Jeff, someone save Jeff and Booker. The rest of them can just talk about 3 unlikable turds.
Yeah. And then Bischoff ends up leaving, and Vince Russo now is like on an island by himself. He completely is out of control, makes himself the world heavyweight champion. And this is the quote of the entire series so far, where they asked Vince Russo why he was on TV so much. He goes, bro, it's because I'm a better TV character than 80% of the performers on there, bro. Those are legit words that man said.
Michael, I watch those shows because I'm a glutton for punishment. I lived through that era. Did like the Natural Born Thrillers, thought they had something.
Yeah.
Vince Russo is one of the worst GM style characters that professional wrestling has ever seen. Eric Bischoff was actually pretty good at being
I think he's very
the
good,
unlikable boss. Like, he actually was pretty good in that role. Vince is like the master of it. The Raw, remember when they had a computer that was the GM of Raw?
Yeah.
Yeah, but that computer was more charismatic and interesting than Vince Russo.
Yeah, I didn't think he was good at all.
No,
he made himself world champion, and thank God for Bill Goldberg.
He came out to Iron Man. This motherfucker booked himself to come out to Iron Man. Like, there's very few songs, like when you're in pro wrestling, especially when it comes to like mainstream songs, like there's some things that just get associated with guys. Stranglehold, that's the Von Erichs, right?
Yeah.
Like Kevin Von Erich, Strangle. Like, I was going to think of that. Like Eye of the Tiger, early Hulk Hogan. There's just the cult of personality, CM Punk, right? Bryan Danielson.
Another one bites the dust is JYD.
Junkyard Dog. Bryan Danielson with the Final Countdown. There's just certain songs get connected with certain guys. This motherfucker tried to take the Road Warriors theme song. The fucking Road Warriors. The unbelievable massive ego on that turd bucket is just astounding to me.
Yeah. The guy got in charge and then immediately just made everything all about himself. And I think it might have been Meltzer that was saying this on his podcast.
So
Instead of booking for
demorred it, is what you're telling me?
Yeah, dude, very much. Like, he wasn't booking to sell tickets, to sell ads. He wasn't booking to sell pay-per-view. He was booking to get vengeance on people and live out his dreams.
Yep.
That's what he was booking for. And with similar, like, I think TNA was way better than WCW 2000.
It was. I'm being harsh.
But like D'Amore, when he took over, he immediately started booking himself all over television, and he booked himself in the co-main event of the second biggest pay-per-view of the year in his hometown, and he won the match. So,
do you remember? I used to compare those TNA episodes to the Muppet Show, and Scott D'Amore is basically like Kermit the Frog.
Yeah,
that was what it was. He was the center. He was the center of those TNA shows, as was Vince Russo. As Tony Schiavone once said, Vince Russo was struck again. But I mean, Scott's way more likable than fucking Vince Russo.
Well, I think Scott D'Amore is also a much better television performer. Vince Russo was never good. He was never good in WCW. And then he went into the early days of TNA in like those Asylum years, and he was awful. He was one of the worst television performers I've ever seen. And he just, for some reason, he just had this like stranglehold over Jeff Jarrett. Jeff just liked the guy and kept hiring him. And then, of course, he got his hooks into Dixie Carter too. I don't know what it is about this guy, but he just kept getting job after job after job.
He must be remarkably charming in person.
I've heard that about him. Yeah. I think even Eric Bischoff said that about him. He doesn't look like it on TV.
No, it never comes off. Like, you listen to the man talk and you're just like, ugh. But I mean, maybe it's like when you see a really dork or ugly dude who's got like a hot chick and you're like, how did this happen? Like,
it's either got big money or big hog.
Big money or big personality, good charisma.
Big personality, yeah.
You know, that actually matters for chicks.
So I think the biggest revelation, and we'll close it on here, we do got to go. The biggest revelation that came out of the show was that the idea to put the World Heavyweight title on David Arquette was from Tony Schiavone.
I have heard that. Yeah. Tony said in his podcast, he said he meant it as a joke. He wasn't serious about it, but
man, that's one of those things like years later, it's like, shit, I should tell everybody I was joking.
You don't want to lay claim to that. You're like,
no. Yeah, but it was his idea. And then Vince Russo goes and pitches it to Eric Bischoff, and then Bischoff likes it. Bischoff was in the match. I'm like, what are they doing? It was Jarrett and Bischoff versus DDP and David Arquette, and whoever got the pin was the world champion. It's like, if you want to know what WCW 2000 was like, that right there explains everything that you need to know about why that company went the way that it did.
And Russo's like, we are on the cover of USA Today. You weren't. You were a blurb. You were a blurb in USA Today where they didn't even say WCW. Like, they just made fun of it and moved on. Like, it did nothing. It did nothing positive. It didn't increase ratings. It tanked pay-per-view buy rates. It was an absolute freaking disaster.
And you turned off your most loyal fans. Like, I was pretty much like, I was on the outs, but I'll be honest, like, I didn't have a whole lot going on in my life, so I still watched. But like, I could not stand the show. And I was like, what am I doing? Like, why am I making myself miserable watching this crap? You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's like, I like David Arquette. I think he's funny.
Arquette's fine. Yeah, he's fine. He's not the world heavyweight champion. And now look what happened to the man. He got hooked up with RJ City and did death matches to try to make amends with all of us.
You know what? But I kind of liked that he made that comeback. I thought that was kind of cool. And it was for that documentary that he did. Yeah, so he was trying to like right the wrongs of his past because he's such a big fan. And I also like the fact, and they didn't talk about this in the documentary, that the money that David Arquette made from those appearances, he donated to Pillman's widow and Pillman's family. And I think that's cool.
It is cool. Yeah. And that should have been said because David Arquette is a good human being. He really is. He just got lumped in with all this shit. And the story too is like, he asks Booker, how many times have you won this thing? And Booker says, I've never won that belt. And then David Arquette's like, oh my God, what have I done? Like, he realizes the gravity of the situation and he's like, I can't have this thing.
Yeah. Right. And then he actually goes on TV and he's like, Booker T should be the world champion. And then sure enough, they ended up making him the world champion, Bash to the Beach 2000 on.
Which was the move. Like, Booker was the guy they should have gone with because they had nobody else. They needed a fresh guy. They needed to make a guy. And they chose the right two guys, him and Scott Steiner. Those are the guys. I mean, you still had Bill Goldberg there, but you already screwed that pooch too many times over.
Yeah, but they, by the time Booker had it, they had devalued the WCW title so much because it just kept hot-potatoing it, switching hands so many times. Booker T was a 5-time WCW champion from the year 2000 to 2001. From the summer of 2000 to the spring of 2001, Booker had won that title 5 times.
Less than 9 months.
Yeah.
Less than a school year, mind you.
Yeah. So, but that was just the philosophy that nothing mattered. Titles didn't matter. All it was about shocking segments and horseshit. And that was the entire Vince Russo booking philosophy.
To this day. Didn't draw in WCW. Didn't draw in TNA. Didn't draw when he did that little thing in Colorado. Like, Vince Russo is one of the worst things to happen in the history of professional wrestling. But he is not responsible for killing WCW.
No, he in fact did not kill WCW. He just failed to save it. And that's where we will leave you guys this week. We will be back next week for the conclusion of Who Killed WCW, where we should find out what the conclusion of the show is. I think, and then JD and I will tell you the real answer next. So stay tuned, Patreon. Stay tuned next week. All right, guys, that's going to do it for us on this episode of Who Killed WCW. And until next time, mahalo. And now it's overtime, and I'm your host, Mike Gilbert, and I'm joined as always by JD Oliva. How you doing, JD?
I reamed people in the chat this week on the regular show, and I feel kind of bad about it. The problem is when they poke the bear, like, it gets so much more engagement and feedback, and I'm always like, God, why do I have to be so mean to get people to talk to us? Jeez.
Yeah, I thought it was entertaining.
And I'm glad.
There's some parallels between the dying days of WCW and some of the mistakes they made and with what AEW is doing now. Now, AEW is a million times better. So I know, like, our old boss, Garrett, was like, don't let anybody ever compare modern AEW or WWE to the dying days of WCW. I'm not talking about the quality of the TV show. I'm just talking about the downward trends in business, talking about the over-reliance on some older talent. They're trying to fix that right now. They're trying to build some newer stars, but there are some similar mistakes that they're making.
Here's the thing: is you could say the same thing about the new generation era WWF too. Like, because, like, for all this talk of new generation, Bob Backlund was the champion. King Kong Bundy was there. Like, they had a lot of older guys that were in very prominent roles, and business was trending low. They were doing TV tape. They were doing Raw tapings in high school gyms.
Yep.
But WWE we don't talk about that. We always say, WCW, because they're the worst case scenario.
Yeah.
Right. WWF was allowed to course correct. But AEW, time will tell if they're mid 90s WWF or early 2000s WCW.
Yeah. Well, hopefully they're mid 90s WWF, because obviously the business came back in a big way. So WCW, Who Killed WCW episode 4. I think that by the end of the series, I was like, this thing is an abomination.
Yeah, this is god awful.
So, and you know what? And I always really dig the guys that make this show. I think by them joining forces with Ad Free Shows, and by them joining forces with Brian Gewirtz and $7 Entertainment, all of them who are just so super friendly with Eric Bischoff. This went from trying to be like a truthful retelling of Who Killed WCW, and maybe even answering that question, which they didn't do. They didn't answer the question. And they really just tried to repair the image of one Eric Bischoff. So by the end, by the end of it, it was like, yes, Vince Russo is still dumb. They gave Vince Russo an opportunity to explain himself, but he made himself sound stupider. And they gave 3 episodes to Eric Bischoff where he was basically putting culpability on everybody else other than himself.
I said it in week 1 when we did this. This is going to be the Eric Bischoff Reclamation Project. And that's what it was. And now there's a bunch of people. Fortunately, the ratings aren't that good for this thing. So there's not that many people that will watch this and will, be converted. But there are, like, the ad-free show idiots that choose to listen to Eric Bischoff every single week. There's professional wrestlers that work for him that didn't even like listening to him for a single week, let alone people that dedicate 2 hours of their week every single week to listening to the ramblings of an incompetent idiot. And, for those people, you're lost to begin with. But what a waste of time and effort and energy.
Yeah, like, so episode 4, what I did like about it, and I'll talk about what I did like. I did like seeing that unreleased footage from the cameraman
That's cool.
going on. I thought that was pretty cool because I was like, oh wow, this is a little bit of my childhood. And I said in episode 1, what I like about documentaries, what's important to me is that A, that I learned something, or B, I get to relive certain moments in my life that I remember, and then B, C, I'm entertained, right? And so I thought episode 1 didn't educate me very much, but I felt like it was entertained. By episode 2, I was like, this is a shit show, right? Like Bischoff is just really trying to repair his image. Episode 3, Vince Russo's trying to repair his image and he fails to do so. And I felt like I know they let him get away with a lot, but they still had some other people calling him out on it. Episode 4 was just all about how it was the AOL Time Warner is what killed WCW, and it had nothing to do with, except for one small comment that Guy Evans made. Guy Evans is the guy that wrote the Nitro book, and he co-wrote a book with not only Dave Pinzer but Eric Bischoff, so you kind of know where his head's at. Where Guy Evans said, well, in the year 2000 or 1999 WCW Uncensored, they had they sold like over 300,000 pay-per-views, and then the very next year with the same main event, Hogan and Flair on top, they sold like 60,000 pay-per-views with 81% decrease. And he said that, but they glossed over it, and then they go right back to the fact that Jamie Kellner hated wrestling and didn't want anything to do with it, that Brad Siegler and Stu Snyder were, in collusion to kill the company, that way WWF could buy it, which actually I actually do believe that's which actually could be a grain of truth. But what they didn't say was that people stopped watching, people stopped going, and people stopped paying for the shows, which is ultimately what killed WCW.
Mm-hmm. Apathy and stupidity killed WCW.
Yeah.
And Eric Bischoff was the leader of it for the whole time that was happening. That's the truth. Like, Jamie Kellner just passed away this past week. So the fact that he died this week is a little ironic, little apropos, we should say. It's a shame when anyone loses their life. I think he's been a bad guy to pro wrestling fans for a long time. And in reality, shows weren't good. They weren't selling tickets. It was no longer a good television program. Still did all right in the ratings, which people kind of forget. Like, we get so lost in the hype of the Monday Night Wars. Nitro was still really competitive, even when it was really bad. The problem was, like, people stopped caring. And it wasn't bad WCW that died. It was irrelevant WCW that died.
Yeah. Well, and so it was doing like okay in the ratings, like it wasn't like tanked completely. That was a far cry from what it was, and it was at its peak, but it was still competitive. But here was the problem: it was so sleazy that they couldn't sell advertising, right? And it was so irrelevant and it was so uncool that they couldn't get advertisers to buy time on it. Honestly, this would have been, so say that Jamie Kellner keeps it, right? And like Fusion Media is able to go through with the sell. So if you guys I'm talking to you guys like you guys know exactly what I'm talking about. So I'm not going to like rehash the whole episode. So if you haven't watched the episode, or if you haven't checked out our series on the WCW invasion of the WWF in 2001, we went week by week with this whole thing. So I'm not going to rehash everything completely, but let's just say, for instance, that Fusion Media successfully purchases WCW and they get to keep their time slot on, I think it was going to be on TBS. They were not going to get to keep Nitro, but they were going to get to keep TBS, right? Say that happened. Why would Jamie Kellner and why would AOL Time Warner believe that on Eric Bischoff's third attempt to turn this thing around that he would be successful? What in his history, other than the small period that he was successful from 96 to 98, what would make them believe that he would be able to do that again when he already tried it the year before and was unsuccessful? He could not lead this company back to the promised land. Why would they think that? Honestly, if Jamie Kellner did keep it, it very likely would have continued to go down the wrong way. And I know that some people believe that maybe he would have changed and turned the thing around, but maybe he would have, but from their point of view, why would they? Honestly, if they did keep it, they might have looked like fools if they did keep the WCW program on TBS.
It would have still done decent ratings. It could have gone worse. We have a friend that would actually have been on the front lines of the WCW reboot.
Yeah.
Who, Mike, our buddy John truly thinks that it would have been a lot better. He would have been booking the cruiserweights. He shared with us his ideas. I wrote an article about it back in 2021, and I think that would have been better. But I don't think you're wrong. I think the ultimate problem is Eric Bischoff is not a very creative guy. A creative guy has multiple ideas. Eric Bischoff had one idea, and I'm not even sure it was his idea. The NWO thing has a lot of people that lay claim to it. In reality, we talked about this last week. The NWO idea was like lifting. There's nothing wrong with lifting ideas. Like everyone does it. There's no problem lifting ideas. The concept of the NWO, the foreign invasion, is something that's uniquely Japanese, right? It had been really the first time we'd really seen that in America, right? Where this foreign invader was taking over. Like we had little minor invasions like ECW and the WWE and the Memphis stuff. And, it's not uncommon to have promotional wars. But the NWO was so uniquely Japanese. It's very much like the UWF angles of New Japan, right? And we've seen tons of those over there. So Bischoff clearly whether he remembers it or not, he clearly lifts from there. And that was kind of it. Like, based on the fact that if you watch him multiple times and on, it was always the same concept. Invading force coming in, taking over. Look when he had TNA, when he was running TNA. What was the angle?
I think he did it a couple of times in TNA.
Mm-hmm.
Like, just kept rehashing the same angle.
Like, the big one that we always think about is Aces and Eights. That was just NWO meets Sons of Anarchy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
They actually, it was so Sons of Anarchy. The actual theme song, was a complete and utter ripoff of Sons of Anarchy.
Oh, it's Dale Oliver, man. What are you gonna do?
Yeah.
That's just kind of what he did.
Yeah.
So that's the problem is Eric. Say what you want about Vince Russo comes off like a complete idiot every time he has a chance to talk. The fact that the man has acolytes is just astounding to me. There's not many of them though, but they're very loud. They're very loud.
Yeah.
He's far more creative than Eric Bischoff is. The problem is he's not very good at it. He has a lot of great ideas, but he has more ideas than Eric Bischoff has.
What Eric Bischoff is really good at is selling other people's ideas because he's a salesman. Yeah. He's a charming guy, and he's good on television. And I bet if you get him into the room, he could probably sell you something. Especially if you were remotely interested in it, but that's how he got his start in pro wrestling. He was trying to sell his Ninja Star Wars game on AWA television. And Vern Gagne was impressed by the guy because he had a little bit of a shooter background with his kickboxing stuff. And
wrestling, he was an amateur wrestler too.
Yeah, he was. And then he brought him onto a show as an announcer. And that's how he got to start. And then he would go around selling advertising for AWA. The guy's a salesman. He sold himself to these producers and they're buying into it. They're complete frauds now. This Evan Husney and Guy Evans, not Guy Evans, Evan Husney and the other guy, Jason Eisner. They essentially put out a fraudulent documentary, and they flat out refused to have anybody that had any journalistic background on the show. They didn't bring in Keller, they didn't bring in Dave Meltzer, Brian Alvarez. Anybody that wrote on the subject during that time was avoided because they felt that maybe they would be too biased. When in reality, they were the ones covering it, and they were in the shit, trying to decipher fact from fiction in this world of grifting liars and lunatics.
Mike, we have to call this what it was. This is a piece of propaganda.
Yeah 100%. And you know what, I hate to say this, you called it on episode 1. You compared it to a Nazi film.
I compared Husney to Lenny Riefenstahl, and God, I really don't hate being right, but you could just smell this coming a mile away, and it just, Eric Bischoff's a slick character, but that's all he really is. He's just a snake oil salesman. He's not even really that successful. He should be so wealthy that money should be coming out of his ears, but it isn't.
No,
it isn't. He's kind of squandered a lot of stuff. He wanted to be Vince so bad. And say what you want about Vince, but Vince actually was pretty creative. Vince had vision. Vince knew what he was doing. Vince is a horrible human being, but Vince knew how to do this job. Eric just wasn't that guy.
No.
Well, we're too young for this, but I'm sure our contemporaries that are older than us wanted Bill Watts to be that guy, and he just wasn't.
Nope.
Truth of the matter is that nobody could have saved WCW.
Yeah, once it started sinking, it was over because like the wounds were just too big and they just kept getting bigger and bigger over every year. You know what I mean? And it started at WCW Starrcade 97. And then WCW Thunder happens. And then the squandering of Bill Goldberg. And then the taking on of like, I think, we've talked about it before. And I know a lot of other people talked about it. Those contracts that they were giving out to those people, guaranteed contracts like that were so huge to people. I'm not talking about their tippy top guys. I'm talking like guys in their 40s that were never really draws, making high 6-figure contracts that were guaranteed. Now, when WCW was at its peak and they were profiting, it made sense to give those guys those contracts. But once this started to go down and people were no longer coming to the buildings, you started to pay those guys those deals. And then so that was also absolutely a problem. They signed way too many people, and a lot of people that were just there for the paycheck that did not want to see the company grow, that didn't care about it. Kevin Nash, right? Like once Kevin Nash was like, oh, this company's sinking, fuck it, I'm out. And then he's just kind of like chilling. And that was one of the things on this episode that really like brought to light. But he was like, why the fuck would I go there? It's dying. I'm just going to sit at home and collect my check. I don't care about this place.
Yeah, he's there's a lot. He bears a lot of responsibility too. Yeah. I have a controversial take on this. I think you can actually start pinpointing WCW dying to 1986. Right? I think you can trace this back to the Great American Bash Tour when they started paying David Allen Coe and Crockett. It's funny. You gave me that interview, which, we stole from ad-free shows. I have no problem admitting that.
I gave you part 2 today, by the way.
Oh, I want that.
It's in your email.
Oh, you're the man. Thank you. Crockett, Jim Crockett is like, I'm so glad I got to hear this, because man's passed now. He's very brutally honest. I love that. I love when guys can look back and admit their faults and say, you know what? I didn't do a very good job on this. I did a good job on this. This is true. No, this is hype. And I like when when a guy's being honest. Like you and I are both big Jeff Jarrett fans. Yeah. Because like there's a tone in a man's voice when you can hear them being real and you know that they are not trying to save themselves all the time and they can admit culpability. That's the problem with Eric Bischoff. Eric Bischoff isn't that guy, right? Jim Crockett was like, he was very clearly telling his story and like he knew when things were right and things weren't. And he was talking about how he didn't fight back enough against Dusty when he wanted to do all this crazy stuff in 86. And they just thought the money would keep coming in. And then they started losing money in 86 and then they got uncool in 87.
Yeah.
Right. They never recovered from you know what? I take that back. You can actually trace it back to Magnum TA's car accident. They had so much invested in Magnum TA being the guy. And there's a good chance he would have been the guy and been super successful because the whole promotion was booked around him and Dusty. And Dusty is very clearly setting the table so that Magnum can be their version of Hulk Hogan. And it doesn't happen because, Magnum gets into a horrible car accident that doesn't end his life, but ends his career. And they just weren't ready to rebound. Like, how do you rebound off that? Imagine if that happens to WWF in 1986. Where do you go?
If Hulk, at that point, they're in a lot of trouble because like they had some stars on the right, like Roddy Piper obviously was over. Randy Savage was getting there. He wasn't there yet. He wasn't the big star that he became a couple years later. They had Steamboat and they had Andre, but Andre is on the downside of his career at that point. Paul Orndorff, was a very big draw when he was with Hogan, and then he did some stuff, outside of WWF. But other than that, like he wasn't really like he needed Hogan to be able to draw those houses, right?
No, but
so Hogan was the straw that stirs the drink for that entire promotion for a decade.
None of those guys could have carried. And again, we're not Hulk Hogan fans. This is not the Hulk Hogan reclamation project. But the reality is
realistic, yeah.
Yes, the reality is if Hulk Hogan gets into a Porsche accident in 1986 and he's paralyzed and can't wrestle, they don't have that guy ready to go to step in. Could it have been Savage? Maybe, but in 86, I don't think he's ready. If you do so what they did with Magnum is they took the hottest heel in the company and turned him babyface, which wasn't Flair, it was Nikita.
Yeah.
Right? That's exactly what you're proposing here with Savage. Would have been the exact same thing. And Savage is way better than Nikita, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't think the results are very different. I mean, like, think about that. So Crockett isn't ready to have that guy, right? And then they falter, and then Ted Turner picks up the scraps.
Mm-hmm.
And the company's on life support for nearly a decade.
Yeah.
Until they start drawing money in early 96.
Yeah. Yeah. So you could say Eric Bischoff legit with what he was doing saved WCW, because I'm sure there's people that wanted to get rid of it prior to them being profitable. Like there's a lot of people there.
Have you read Guy Evans' book? No,
I have not. No.
Check the audiobook. That's how I read it. Actually, I listened to the audiobook. It's a great audiobook. The 100%. When Ted Turner decided, because Vince sent him a letter that pissed him off, because Vince can never stop kicking at hornet's nest. That's why Nitro happened.
Yeah,
because Ted just got pissed and said, "Yep, we're going to give you a spot right against them." And people in TNT were like, "What the fuck? We have to have wrestling on our network? What the hell?" That's
and Brad Siegler said as much in I believe episode 1. I think.
Yes, sir. That's the truth. But again, so you could actually say the 2 years the WCW was successful was an aberration, because for the majority of the company's existence, it was not.
It lost, and you've said this several times, and they talked, like Brad Siegler said it. It's like, why do we still have this company? It loses money every single year, with the exception of 2 years. It was a money loser outside of that 2 years. Like, it makes no sense to keep it.
Ted liked wrestling.
Yeah.
And Ted, something that Jim Crockett said in the interviews, Ted always wanted to own wrestling. That's why he backed Ann Gunkel when she had the big Georgia War in the mid 70s, is that Ted wanted to have the wrestling and he wanted to be part of it and he wanted to own it. Ted liked wrestling. He didn't watch every week, but he liked it. He knew that people loved wrestling and he thought it was cool.
Yeah.
Like,
well, and he knew that help build his network, you know?
This is the thing. If Ted isn't forced out, the show probably survives. Right?
So yeah, maybe it survives, but I think the greater point that needs to be made, and I think where they should have went with the end of Who Killed WCW, is that so if Ted isn't forced out, they're going to continue to bleed money for a while. Ted wasn't going to give up on the thing, but so he is forced out. If WCW was still making money, they would still be on the air.
Oh, I agree with that.
They were canceled because the business was going to shit. They were losing money, and they were going to sell the thing, but they canceled the TV show because they couldn't sell ads because it was so uncool and so ineffective that it wasn't no longer a hot property. So they had no reason to keep it. And that's why WCW died. They didn't die because of infighting and politics among Turner executives and all this stuff. They didn't die because Jamie Kellner's this boogeyman that hated wrestling. If it was making them money, they would have kept it, right? It's not a fucking charity. This is a business, you idiots. So Jamie Kellner's not a bad guy because he canceled your shit property. He canceled it because he was just being a smart businessman. Hey, we need to actually talk about Bix's article on Babyface.
We should.
Yeah, so that was a very good article. He's saying that there was forces within Turner that basically put a poison pill in that Fusion Media deal, saying that if Fusion Media, so go check out Bix's article on Babyface versus Heel. So Fusion Media putting together the deal, they made the proposal to TBS or to Turner, and one of the Turner people who had it out for Jamie Kellner had it put into the contract that if WCW got canceled, then Fusion Media would still own the rights to that time slot, and they could put anything else that they wanted on there. Now, that is not a proven thing. I think that's more of a theory at this point, but it did seem like it was legit. And so there was that factor in too. And so they were trying to make Jamie Kellner look bad, and had Jamie Kellner sign that deal and put them on, and then gave Fusion Media autonomy over that time slot, he would have been ousted as an executive.
Mm-hmm. No, 100%. That is definitely a poison pill. I remember Bix and Chris discovered that on their BT at the Between the Sheets podcast, Patreon podcasts, much like this one. They did the death of WCW, and they did an amazing job, amazingly thorough job. I highly recommend their Death of WCW podcasts. they uncover some really interesting things. They talk a lot about Lenita Erickson and what she was trying to bring to the table. Like there's a lot that gets glossed over sometimes. So yeah, Stu Snyder and Brad Siegel were fraternity brothers at Cornell. They were friends. They did have a relationship. Siegel wanted to sell it to his buddy because he knew they could do something with it. Right? Turner didn't want him. Like I said, it was losing money. They didn't like it to begin with. It was a black eye, and then it wasn't Turner anymore. It was AOL.
Yeah.
Right. And AOL was not a successful merger. That company is known for being one of the worst mergers in the history of corporate assassinry. Like WCW is a victim of that, but they allowed themselves to be a victim of it.
Yeah.
It was a bad show.
Yeah. If they were, if they weren't on such a losing streak, they very likely would not. And if they did get canceled on a winning streak, then maybe you would have an argument. Then maybe Bischoff would have an argument. It's like, look, this thing was coming back up. We were becoming profitable again. Ratings are back up. Houses are back up, and they still canceled us. So, okay, well then yeah, they're assholes. But no, it wasn't the case. Like everything was shit by the end of it. That if they didn't cancel, that they would have been fools.
I actually think you could argue that it was actually worse in 2000 than it is in 2001. Like there's actually when they canceled the show, it wasn't awful. Like it wasn't good, but I mean, like it was better than it was around Bash at the Beach, 9 months before then. However, like we talked about AEW, once the train starts going in one direction, it takes a long time for things to kind of catch up.
Yeah.
Right? Like WWF started getting good in 97. By the time it gets really popular in 98, the show isn't as good as it was the year before, but the train's already moving that way. Right? Yeah. AEW starts to slip, and someone's like, well, it's gone down since the Bruchachos. And it's like, bro, it's been going down before the Bruchachos. The Bruchachos got that avalanche ball rolling, like that big old boulder that chases Indiana Jones. It just gains momentum the further downhill it goes.
Well, right? And I think the Brochachos, and we'll go here in a couple of minutes, but I think the Brochachos being so bad kind of almost made it okay. Like we started to then talk about how bad the show was at that point, but prior to then they had the benefit of the doubt. And maybe we were all in a little bit of denial because we just loved the show so much. 100%. But once the Brochachos happened, they were like, okay, no, these guys are idiots. Yeah. And they're making some pretty glaring mistakes. And then we started to notice the ones that we didn't notice before. Now all the other blemishes are out there in the open, and now we're all actively talking about it. And now, and I think that that's still the case. We're being honest when we're, insulting them essentially.
The Punk Nightmare stuff was bad, but the TV was still pretty good at the time.
Yeah.
Right. I don't think it started really hitting the TV product until last year. Right. And then they had completely lost their identity at that point because like they had so much invested in Punk, and that was just turned out that was a bad marriage. Man, you guys were in love at first and it looked like it was going to go good. And you find out she's crazy and, killed your dog,
Yeah. But let's put a bow on this whole WCW thing. I think the answer to who killed WCW is a lot of people. And a lot of things. I think the person most at fault is Eric Bischoff. And I'll always believe that because he was in charge. He made a lot of bad decisions. He's like, and he put a lot of people in positions that they shouldn't have been in. Like it happened on his watch. He gets fired in 99. They bring in Vince Russo, but by that point it was already too late. This thing was going downhill and nobody was bringing it back to life. That is my opinion. But if you say, well, no, it was a combination of Bischoff, Kevin Nash, Hulk Hogan. I think Hulk Hogan should be a big part of that. Bad contracts, and then AOL Time Warner not wanting the show anymore. Yeah, all those things are true. But I think that if it did not get off the rails as bad as it did under Eric Bischoff's watch, it would still be a company.
Here's the thing: Jim Herd took it over and ran it into the ground immediately. Eric Bischoff. So there's this, quickly, I know you want to get up on this. There's this story about this. I don't know if you've read it. There's this plastic surgeon that accidentally killed his wife while he was doing surgery. Have you read about this?
No.
So there's this plastic surgeon, right? He did all these like procedures on his wife, and he was performing surgery on her in his clinic right? And she was getting some crazy stuff done. She just took like a handful of barbiturates, then he started operating on her, and then she starts waking up during the surgery. So he sticks her full of a bunch of undiluted lidocaine, and then her body, she goes into seizure.
Wow.
Right? And then he goes, no, don't call the ambulance. I can save her. She winds up going to the hospital anyway. So he does save her in that moment. She lives for another 2 weeks in the hospital, basically in a coma, never regains consciousness, but she's alive, and then has a heart attack and dies. I kind of think like that's kind of what happened here. Like it was bad, and then he saved it.
Yeah.
But his actions in saving it caused the downfall. Because all the stuff that saves WCW is the stuff that puts it in the ground. Maybe that was a really harsh metaphor, but I don't know. I see a parallel.
I think it was accurate, but the things that saved WCW winded up killing it.
Yeah.
Ultimately.
That's what I was going for. I was really harsh in the long run, but I think that,
yeah. I hope that is the last time we talk about who killed WCW, but I get the feeling this topic is going to rear its ugly head again.
I'm sick of it. I feel like every year we talk about this at least for a few weeks.
Well, we did a whole series on the WCW invasion where we went week by week and kind of relived some of this stuff, and it was actually kind of fun. But,
it was. I had a good time with it. We had Muse on. Muse got to tell his story. That was fun.
Yeah. So that whole thing was really cool. But all right, guys, that is going to do it for us on this episode of Overtime. Next week, I don't know what we're going to talk about on the next episode of Overtime, but we'll come up with something. I'm always got. I'm full of ideas. I'm full of a lot of things, but ideas are one of the things that I'm full of. So we'll come up with something.
Maybe we'll do a Forbidden Door wrap-up show. We've never done one of those before.
Yeah, we haven't. It's that it gets to be a little bit tough with how late those things go, but maybe we could try it. Yeah,
maybe we can try it. I have no school Monday.
Okay, well we will talk, but and until next time, mahalo.
This podcast is a member of the Voices of Wrestling Podcasting Network.
I'm sorry, guys, I hit the wrong button. Hold on, let me hit the right button.
I want to see something really scary.
Attention. Do I have everybody's attention now?
Hello, do you like New Japan Pro Wrestling? Are you a Shin Nihon freak? If so, check out the Super J-Cast with Joel and Damon on the Voices of Wrestling Podcast Network.
And even if you fucking hate New Japan Pro Wrestling, listen to the Super J-Cast anyway. Not just for our great show reviews, analysis, and pastrami sandwiches, but there's also usually some dick jokes somewhere in the obligatory opening 30 minutes of absolute nonsense we chat about every single week. That's the Super J-Cast for all the best talk about New Japan Pro Wrestling, crisps, and pornography.